Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the November 18th meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. I'm Julie Pierce. I am the chair. I would invite you all to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Looks like we have a full house tonight. That's wonderful. Welcome to our meeting. The first item on our agenda is public comment. I wanted to know if there was anyone in the audience that has a comment on any item not listed on tonight's agenda. If so, you can come forward. I see no one coming forward, so we will close the public. I think you've got one. Do we? Public comment for an item not on tonight's agenda? Okay, come on forward. You can give Denise your speaker card.
I'll fill this out right after, sorry.
Okay, very good.
I apologize if this is on the agenda. I don't think it is. I haven't been here before, but thank you for your time. My name is Adrienne Robillard, and I live over in the Woodlands neighborhood here in Walnut Creek. And with the development of the orchard underway and Encina Grande being remodeled, I just wanted to put out on the radar some attention that we feel over in this part of Walnut Creek needs to be put towards the crossing at Ignacio Valley Road and Oak Grove Road with all the, it's a regional roadway, a lot of commuter traffic that goes through there, and we'd like to see something for the, the children who cross over Foothill Middle School, and there's going to be a senior living community, a park, and a lot of amenities in that area soon, and we'd like to see some kind of perhaps a bridge or other type of solution looked at for consideration.
Thank you for your comment. I would suggest you also take that comment to the city of Walnut Creek, since that is in their jurisdiction.
Yes, we have. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for your comments. Okay, is there anyone else here to speak on an item that is not on this evening's agenda? Seeing no one else come forward, I want to point out that Lindsay Willis over here will be collecting speaker cards for future items. The speaker cards are on the back table. Please fill them out and get them to Lindsay, and then Lindsay will bring them up as they come forward. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes. Any additions, corrections, or a motion for approval?
Move approval.
Second. Motion by Tatson, second by Abelson. All in favor, say aye. Oppose? Abstain. That carries unanimously by those present. The next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Anything anyone wishes to pull for separate discussion?
Move approval.
Second.
Have a motion by Tatson, a second by Romick. All in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose? Abstain. That carries unanimously by those present as well. Please note for the record that Commissioner Durant just entered the room, as did our ex officio member from BART, Gail Murray. So we are done with the consent calendar, and I would like to ask for your indulgence, and I would like to flip items 4A9 with the major discussion item, and then actually get rid of both of the items listed under number 4, so that those who don't want to spend the next couple of hours perhaps here listening to public comment can be on their way home. So I'm going to call for the recommendation from the Administrative and Projects Committee authorizing the sale of the Series 2012A bonds, and Randy, you are going to give the introduction to that.
Good evening, Chair Pierce, members of the CCTA Commission. My name is Randy Carlton. I'm the CFO for the authority. The item before you has been discussed with the board previously. On September 16th, the board approved a financing plan and directed staff to refinance bonds that we issued in 2012. The refinancing addresses a requirement we have to reissue the 2012 bonds on or before December 15th. Since then, we've been working with the financing team to put together the details for which you're being asked to approve tonight. One of the steps in this effort was to do a request for proposal to call for banks to submit the pricing terms for a direct purchase of our bonds. We received proposals. We evaluated them very carefully with assistance from Peter Schellenberger at PFM, and the most competitive pricing terms and conditions came from State Street Bank, headquartered in Boston. We're very pleased with the terms, in particular the flexibility that the State Street proposal brings forward to the authority. I know through comments from the board that with this type of transaction, we're having to come back, every 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. It's much like an adjustable rate mortgage loan where we have a number of years where the terms are fixed in place. The first time we did this in 2012, we fixed the term for 3 years. This time we were able to extend that to 5 years. So that saves us in the transactional costs associated each time when we bring one of these forward. And one of the features of the State Street Bank proposal that is particularly attractive is their willingness to reconsider those terms at the end of the 5 years so that we can execute the transaction with minimal costs and minimal documentation. I would like to introduce the representative from State Street Bank who's traveled here from Boston to say a few words on behalf of her bank. In the audience today is Mimi Lee of State Street Bank. Would you like to come up?
Welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening, and thank you, Randy, for inviting David and me to this setting to be able to have the opportunity to speak in front of you today. I am a representative from State Street Bank. I am the primary account manager for this direct purchase transaction that we're working on together with the CCTA. David is from Chapman Cutler, and they are the bank counsel for our transaction, so he is the key architect for the documents that you have reviewed. I just wanted to, let everyone know that we're very excited at the opportunity to work with the CCTA on this direct lending transaction. As a bank based out of Boston, we're always looking to increase our relationships within the state of California. State Street is a custody bank. I'm not sure if many folks in the room are familiar with our name. We don't have a commercial retail banking business. We primarily provide custody services for institutional assets, and we also have a municipal finance business. So when we are able to work with issuers across the country, it's something that we're looking to do to extend our portfolio. We've been in the marketplace in the public finance for quite some time. My group is called the Municipal Products Group, and we've had over 2 decades of experience in this market, and direct lending is an area of growth for us. And this transaction in particular makes a lot of sense because of the strong credit profile of CCTA. It's one of the reasons why we're able to offer a longer term of 5 years and lock in those attractive rates and features for this particular transaction. So, thank you very much, everyone. And if you have any questions on the transaction, please feel free.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Newell.
First of all, thank you so much for coming all the way out here. Welcome to California. Did you bring any water with you? You got a lot of snow this year. But
I'll trade you some water for some sunshine.
Okay. Deal. We got lots of that. You mentioned a little bit, and I really just mean it sincerely. Thank you for this. I think we're all excited by this. You mentioned a little bit of why you were doing this. Why buy this particular type of instrument? How does that fit into your portfolio, and why are you attracted? We're just sort of curious. This is the only one we have.
Sure.
Hopefully it's the last one, but it's one of those transactions that's a little unusual. Why are you stepping in here? I know we have great credit. We are really, and we appreciate you acknowledging that, but what's the real reason?
Sure. Absolutely. So taking a step back, so our business has traditionally been in credit enhancement facilities. So basically liquidity and letters of credits that support variable rate bonds issued in the public marketplace and commercial paper. Direct lending the last couple of years has really proliferated in our marketplace, and it's important to banks like State Street because it gives us the same access to issuers and relationships, but at the same time, these facilities also give banks access to loan accounting treatment because these facilities are accounted for as loans for the bank. And for a bank like State Street, we don't have a commercial retail lending book. And so the bank is looking to have access to loans through other formats. We really like the municipal asset class. It's a very safe, conservative asset class, and it's a way for us to get loan accounting treatment as well. So for that reason, these particular types of instruments are very favorable. And also under the current regulatory environment, there's been some new requirements passed through under Basel III and Dodd-Frank, and these instruments are particularly favorable because they're funded basically upfront. So our traditional facilities, they are unfunded for a period of 3 to 5 years, and if there's a liquidity or credit issue, there's a potential liquidity event and a funding for the bank. Whereas when we're purchasing banks on State Street's balance sheet, we're utilizing that balance sheet capacity and purchasing the bonds and providing the funding up front, and that really provides some favorable treatment for the regulatory requirements that we face.
Hence, that's why we're getting a little better rate. This is good. I appreciate that. Thank you, and I'd be glad to move this item.
All right, we have a motion.
I'll second the item and just also want to thank both you for your bid, and we appreciate that, and also thank our finance team and our advisors for coming up with this idea. This has turned out to be, for us, a far better solution than I think the original thought and what we did several years ago, both in terms of rates and longevity and hopefully opportunities to renew at an ongoing favorable rate. So just like to offer my thanks. And having gone to school in Boston, I actually immediately recognized State Street Bank.
That's wonderful. Yes, I would just add my thanks as well. We had the opportunity, Executive Director and Randy Carlton and I, to visit your beautiful city about 6 weeks ago on a gorgeous weekend and had absolutely perfect weather. Enjoyed very long showers, which we can't do here, with lots of water, no restrictors. It was really wonderful, and I can't wait to go back to Boston. So
welcome to visit us.
That was my first visit. I can't wait to go back. So thank you for flying all the way out to sunny California. And I wish we could send some of that back with you. So anyway, we have a motion by Arnrich and a second by Tatson. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain. That carries unanimously by those present. Thank you very much. Enjoy your stay. I hope you don't have to rush back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to item 4A10, which is the I-80 San Pablo Dam Road interchange reconstruction. And Ivan's going to take that item for us. And I do have one speaker on this item. If there's anyone else that wants to speak on this item, please get a speaker card to Lindsay, or if you want to speak on item 3, you can also give those to Lindsay as well.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Hope you can hear me well. My name is Ivan Ramirez, and I am the Construction Manager for the Authority. And this is an action item. We're requesting the Board to authorize the Executive Director to award the construction contract, and the Chair, of San Pablo Dam Road Phase 1 to the lowest responsible bidder submitting a responsive bid, Prosper and Bull. Authority gave staff authority to advertise, award, and administer the construction contract. Under that authority, we advertised the construction contract on September 18th. We opened up bids on September 29th, and we received in total 9 bids. So there's some important characteristics of this contract. Number one is that the bidder, the prime contractor, has to perform at least 30% of the work themselves, self-performance as spec. In addition to that, the contract has a DBE goal of 10%. Those two requirements are attached to financial strings that come with federal money. And the third requirement is that the contractor has to list at bid time the subcontractors that are going to be performing the work. So once we receive the bids, staff with our CM firm, the Hanna Group, and our PM firm that's supporting construction, Cole Engineering and Management, and in full consultation with BBK, our attorneys, analyze the bids. And one of the first things that we found out is that the lowest bid, Viking Construction, or the lowest bidder, when they submitted the paperwork, they did not state that they were going to self-perform 30% of the work. They were only about 20%. So we wrote a letter to them and asked them to explain why that was the case. And they just responded to us by saying that it was just a mathematical error, just a common mistake that they made, honest mistake that they made. So in consultation with BBK, it was established that that is not a justification for not stating that you're going to perform 30% of the work, and that there's case law associated like that with almost exactly the same characteristics of our situation. And with that, we deem the lowest bidder, Viking Construction, to be non-responsive. While we were doing that, we will also receive a bid protest from the third lowest bidder, Giuliani Constructors, and they put a bid against Viking, which is the lowest bidder, and also against the second lowest bidder, who is Brosmer and Wall. So we didn't entertain the Viking protest because we had already determined it was non-responsive. But it was basically the protest was associated with how they submitted the DBE forms and the subcontractor list form. The protest against Brosmer and Wall, the second lowest bidder, had three main points. One had to do with how they submitted the DBE forms and also how they submitted the subcontractor list forms. After reviewing that, we can say that there is no irregularities as to how Brosmer and Wall submitted those forms. The third point that they made is that it contained a mathematical error, and I'm going to show you in one slide what they are stating. If you look at the table, you have right there you have 3 unit prices with the descriptions and the way you measure those, use the amount of work. And you also have a quantity, a unit price, and an item total. Our contract says send symbols also have no significance in establishing any unit price or item totals since such figures are assumed to be expressed in dollars or dollars and decimal fractions of a dollar. So Giuliani Constructors is arguing that the superscript with the underline on each of those quantities should just be considered it should not be considered a decimal. So for instance, on item 259, instead of it being $1,250, in fact, it should be $125,000. So that brings up the total price by 100%. It raises it. Therefore, it makes Brosmer and Wall the highest bidder. So we responded. So again, in discussions with BBK, it was established that that is a material error, and it can be waived by the authority. The authority has full discretion to waive that error. And again, that being the case, that will make Brosmer and Wall the lowest bidder. So we send our letters to intent to award to all the bidders, and I guess not surprisingly, we got responses from Viking, the lowest bidder, and Giuliani Constructors. The Viking protest basically reiterated what they said originally, so there was nothing new there. Giuliani Constructors brought up an additional point. Now, keep in mind that those additional protests are not timely. The contract has a deadline in which protests can be submitted, and this additional information was not submitted in a timely manner, so they're rejected based on those grounds. But in addition to that, the argument that they make is also resolved in the contract. Again, if you look again at item 259, and if you look at the unit price, it doesn't have the underline on the subscript. So what they argue is, well, if you're going to assume that the underline and the subscript are decimals, then that cannot be a decimal. But the contract says that if there is a conflict between the unit price and item total, then you can rely on the item total. And then you will use that to divide by a number of units, and that will give you the unit price. In this case, it's 1 unit, so it doesn't change it. So therefore, the contract resolves this conflict. So after that, and we again responded to the letters, we also have what we call an additional supplemental bid protest from Gilardi Constructors' attorney. And in that letter, again, it wasn't timely because it didn't fit within the guidelines that we have in the contract. And they also reiterated the same arguments that Gilardi had made in the past. I want to make a note here. Gilardi Constructors has previously bid our work. They bid Sand Creek project. And they bid the contract exactly with those same characteristics. In addition to that, the board has previously awarded contracts, the Connector Run project that went to RGW. The way they interpreted, or the way they stated the decimals and the prices is exactly like it's written there with the superscript and the underline. And that was also the case with the lowest bidder at Sand Creek. So in a way, this is industry standard. There's nothing new here. We get out of, I would say about 75 to 80% of the bids that we get use this to denote decimals. So with that, I don't know if Mala wants to add anything to my presentation.
I was just going to say that we were utilizing the same specs when Gilardi also used the same notation, so nothing has changed. It's the same information.
So with that, staff recommends, and I'm going to read this because it's kind of long recommendation. Staff seeks authorization for the chair to execute agreement number 416 with Brassamore and Wall in the amount of $17,128.96 to provide construction services. And in addition, staff seeks approval to resolution 1557P, which rejects the bid protests, rejects the Viking bid as non-responsive, reject the supplemental bid protests, waives any immaterial defects, if any, in the bids received, and authorizes the executive director to award the construction contract to Brassamore and Wall. With that, I am open to questions.
I'm going to go first to public comment. I do have one speaker card. I note a gentleman raised his hand. I think he's getting a new speaker card. So we will go with the first speaker, who is Thomas Smith with Gilardi Construction.
I'm going to try and adjust this, or maybe you can hear me.
You can tip it up.
It looks like that worked. I do have handouts. I can hand them out now, or maybe after I've said.
You can leave them with staff, and she can distribute them.
Okay. And if I'll be referring to them.
Okay.
And so I'm just trying to cut down on what it is you had to look at. Good evening, commissioners. So we appreciate the opportunity to say our piece. Thank you, Mr. Ramirez, for the points that you've made. Clearly, the public contracting is a very sacred process because it has to do with public money, and there needs to be rules of engagement, and that really is what our protest was about. We're not trying to pick anybody's pocket. And by the way, I guess I should introduce myself. I am Thomas Smith, estimating manager for Gilardi Construction, and I am responsible for these types of things, including all contracts and estimates that leave Gilardi Construction, including this estimate. But our friends Brassamore and Wall are fine contractors. We're not trying to take a project that's rightfully theirs. But we are interested in the rules of engagement, and that was our protest is about. what I'd like to do is share with you the spec that we're reading as to why we have the opinion that we have, and certainly you'll be able to draw your own conclusions from there. So if you want, I can hand those documents to you, or I can just refer to it, and you can tell me if you'd like to reference it yourself.
Denise, would you pass them out? Or Ross can do that while you keep the records. That would probably be better.
And I fear that I only have 10 copies, and I see that I have more than 10 people here, so I apologize.
Goodness gracious.
So while Mr. Chittenden is passing those out, I will tell you that Gelati Construction has been in business for 100 years. We bid countless Caltrans and other public agency work every year and perform on the contracts that we happen to be the low bidder on. We're familiar with the bidding process. We're not confused as to what it was required of us on the day of the bid here. So you won't hear from me saying that, we're sorry, we misunderstood, it's our fault, shame on us. If we make that type of mistake, then we expect to be removed as a non-responsive bidder. And so we're cognizant of that, and because it is our livelihood, we are interested in what the rules of engagement are for this very reason. And so before the blue tab that you see there is a copy of Brosmer's bid. At least it's a partial copy. It's the first pages and their pricing, and then it stops after that because the rest of it isn't pertinent. But if you turn to page 4, right inside Brosmer's proposal, you'll see some yellow highlight, some blue highlight, and this is just 4 pages into the first document. And really, the whole crux of this is the blue highlighted. Also, there's some red that we threw in for color, but and I've got to get this closer to my eyes to be able to read it. But as Mr. Ramirez indicated, there is language about cent symbols and such, and I'll just move along here. The key sentence, actually there's a couple of them, but the key sentence here really is, cent symbols also have no significance in establishing any unit price or item total, since all such figures are assumed to be expressed in dollars or dollars in decimal fractions of a dollar. That's the key sentence there. Also, the following page talks about the undersigned, by submitting this proposal, specifically acknowledges, affirms, declares, and agrees to the following, and it states that you have carefully examined the notice to bidders, the plans, the specifications, and other contract documents, including this contract form. So it's telling us that we're to familiarize ourselves with the bidding documents and perform them accordingly. So it just so happens that Brosmer, when they filled out their bid documents on the day of the bid, they used 2 zeros at the end, underlined, apparently in an effort to denote cents. Unfortunately, that's in direct conflict with the language we just read, which states that cent symbols have no mathematical significance and will be ignored, because all such digits are considered to be whole dollars. And what it really means, like the example that Mr. Ramirez put on the screen behind you, is when you see in that example, I guess that's bid item 256, $36.00 with an underscore. You have to read those digits until you run into a decimal. Since there is no decimal, that becomes $3,600. And it's not trying to be sleight of hand. That's what the authority's language says. And it actually says it twice here. I gotta get this back up to my eyes. It says symbols such as commas and dollar signs will be ignored and have no mathematical significance in establishing any unit price. Written unit prices and item totals will be interpreted according to the number of digits and, if applicable, decimal placement. And so that really is the essence of it. There are no decimals in Brosemer's bid. If the authority wishes to accept their bid and waive that, the board has the authority to do such things, but it is counter to what the specification required. And then I guess I'll say one last point here. At the bottom of that same page, you'll see also yellow under that last blue highlighted, it says, these provisions for the resolution of specific irregularities cannot be so comprehensive as to cover every omission, inconsistency, error, or other irregularity which may occur in a bid. Any situation not specifically provided for will be decided by the authority. Certainly, the authority has the right to waive minor irregularities. In this case, the authority already decided this before anybody turned in a bid. For whatever reason, the authority on page 3 decided to spell out the logic that it was going to use in interpreting the bid items submitted by the bidding contractors. And it did that by this logic on page 3. It also went on to say we can't be so comprehensive about all of our logic, so we'll decide the irregularities as they come if we haven't already decided them above. In this case, they had decided it above, and therefore they don't have the ability to use their own discretion later on. That really is the basis of our protest. There's other documents in there which the orange is simply, if you don't mind, I'm going to grab my bottle of water. After the blue tab, you'll see we wrote 4 letters. Our outside counsel wrote the 5th letter. I understand that Mr. Ramirez indicated that we submitted untimely protest. The 2 original letters were submitted within the 5 days. The subsequent letters brought up no new information. They were simply expounding on that decimal point, no pun intended, and we were trying to convey that because the responses that we were getting from staff was not jiving with the specifications, so we were trying to help provide additional information. But nonetheless, we did timely bring that point up in the original bid letter or bid protest letter, and therefore the subsequent letters, if you want to waive or disregard them, that's fine with me. But then ultimately, and with this I will close. If you turn after the yellow tab are the 2 letters that Gelati Construction received from the authority. And in here, Mr. Chittenden and his staff is trying to let me down gently. And when I say me, I mean Gelati Construction. And he does so by saying, I have to take my glasses off to read this. Brosemer's bid schedule does not use commas, dollar signs, and cent symbols, but instead uses an underline and superscript to depict cents. And it goes on to, in the next paragraph, given the clear, this is all in the pink highlighting on your copy, given the clear and unambiguous use of the superscript and underline to depict cents in the bid schedule, the near universal meaning of assigned to this decimal notation. So apparently what staff has decided is that the smaller zeros with the underline is not a cent symbol, but it is what they say used to depict cents. I have a modest IQ, and it was hard for me to wrap my mind around that kind of tortured logic there. If we're using something to depict cents, that to me is a cent symbol. And the authority's language has already stated that cent symbols will be have no mathematical significance, and that until we find a decimal, those will be considered dollars. So that's what our protest was based on. If the specifications are interpreted differently, I'd love to be educated on that and informed on that decision, and I appreciate your time. But unless you have any questions for me, I'm certainly available.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We appreciate your comments, and I'd like to ask Mala to clarify where we are today.
What Mr. Smith has presented is in the staff report and the letters that you've previously read, and we have no new information. We think this is immaterial and that you can proceed as recommended.
Okay. And I will just ask Ivan directly. I think you said in your staff report that Gelati in the past has used exactly the same terminology.
You know, that information wasn't provided in the staff report, but I am.
You verbally said that.
Yes, verbally stating that to you tonight. We went back and did some research, and in fact, Gelati Construction has used this. And one just quick comment, if you don't mind. So, Mr. Smith didn't finish the sentence here, where it says any situation not specifically provided for will be decided by the authority in order to best protect the public interest in the prompt and economical completion of the work. I think that proceeding in any other way will probably infringe on that statement there. And with that, I'll be open to more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I do have another public comment. If we can take that before we take the...
Ask him a question.
Yes. Go ahead, Newell.
Mr. Smith, I appreciate, first of all, I'll just make a statement. You know, I'm from Danville. We love your company. You do a great job.
Thank you.
But I'm a little surprised you're standing here on this note. I'm an old estimator. We've all done that. That's a convention that any reasonable, prudent person, and the test, I would say, is if 10 people looked at that, would they come to the same conclusion? The answer is, anybody come to a different conclusion? No. You've used it in the past. And I guess I'm just, I get it. You want the bid. And if it was a pure altruistic, let's do the math. Your letter, by the way, is dated the 5th of October. It's 5 days to respond?
5 business days.
Right. Well, you know, it just seems to be that, you know, in the world, what's really good news for us as an agency is these bids were really close. There must have been really good plans. So, you know, kudos to those. And as you know, in the bidding world, you bid what you know, you bid what you see, or bid what you think you can get away with and hope that you get extras. This shows that we had really good bid documents. Do you expect us to judge, you know, Gelati Brothers when we look at your other bids in the same way? Would you like us to go back and review yours to see if this is the same standard that you think is a reasonably prudent standard, that there is somehow we are misreading, that we're not able to read, that when somebody writes $1,206/00, that means 00. Is a reasonably prudent person under any circumstances, in your mind, your experience, and if we had asked you to supply us any of your past estimates, would that be a convention that you would have used?
Yeah, I would be disingenuous if I said, just like we all write checks to do that I didn't know what the meaning was.
So our banks use that as a conventional standard, and they've been doing that for how many hundred years? Because, by the way, I have a copy of a check that George Washington wrote, just a copy. And you know what? It had 00 with an underscore.
Yeah.
So let me see, that's 200. A long time ago. Yeah, long time ago. So, you know, I just, it doesn't serve me well to have you standing here under something like this. This isn't material in any way. So why are we going through this? This really bothers me because you've used it. So in all fairness, that you got away with it and we missed it, and because nobody protested, we're supposed to think when this is considered a normal, we have written language, and lawyers sitting next to me use all of these conventions. So how can we be wasting our time doing this?
Well, I wish not to waste anyone's time. If the specification hadn't made the statement that it had, I would not be standing here. In other words, I would not have brought it up on my own. I never have before. I have one other example of this. That same document, that same page is often incorporated with other municipalities. Sonoma County uses it, and interestingly enough, the City of Davis uses it. The City of Davis, on June 2nd of this year, so it's just several months ago, oddly enough, we were the third low bidder. The first and second low bidder were removed as non-responsive for that language, and we were awarded the contract as with about $17.3 million for a pipeline project. But and that's what they decided to do. And the delta between us and the low bidder, which was KJ Woods, was $2.1 million. The second low bidder was Garnet Pacific at $1.2 million. And so there's an example of where they decided to follow their own specification. And had the specification not said this, I would not have brought it up. And I would make one other point. The response that we got in writing cited two precedents. One was, I think probably for irony, Gelati Construction versus the City of Richmond, a protest against Gelati Brothers, where we had protested the 50% rule of subcontracting, and we were denied that protest because they said they could waive it. Here, staff is recommending Viking be disqualified because they violated the 30% subcontracting rule. So, in one hand, they're giving me precedent setting that the City of Richmond is able to waive the 50% subcontracting rule, yet here they're wanting you to dismiss Viking for the same reason. So I don't know why they wouldn't employ the same logic and consider that a minor irregularity. And this is all about the rules of engagement. The authority wrote the spec however they wrote it. We interpret it literally because it is public contracting playing field. And if we don't exactly do what it says, we will be removed as non-responsive. If an ownership decides to rule otherwise, we have no control over that, but we will always abide by the requirements.
Chair Pierce,
Sorry, Mala. I was trying to see where the voice was coming from.
Sorry, I'd like to respond to that, if that's
Thank you.
all right. Our firm also represents the City of Davis. My colleague who has been advising Ivan also advised the City of Davis, and I think you misrepresented the facts on that case. We reject, on behalf of our firm, we advise the City of Davis to reject those two bids for failure to comply with DBE regulations. So I don't think you represented that accurately.
Okay. Well, I'm not trying to misrepresent it. That was the protest that we had filed, and we were awarded the contract.
Okay. David?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the interest of fairness, I think it's troubling to hear you call our staff's interpretation tortured, because I happen to share their interpretation. I think in the letters, they've indicated pretty clearly that the words that you've selected or that Gelati has selected to bolster its claim about the language is pretty clear. The words that you're sort of focused on don't exist in the paragraph. There's nothing in the paragraph that addresses these zeros with the slash under it or the dash or the line under it. And so as our staff, it's my turn, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. So as the letter from our staff clearly says, the bid schedule does not use commas, dollar signs, or cent symbols. Cent symbols are what's referred to in the blue highlighted language that you yourself have shared with us. So to the extent that the approach taken by the successful bidder doesn't fit within this paragraph, then it does appear to me that we're down into the situation below where the situation not specifically provided for will be decided by the authority. Is that an unfair interpretation in your view?
No, that is accurate.
Okay, good. All right, so without any of the other sort of color around staff's view, you're comfortable with that interpretation?
What I was going to say is maybe that is the problem. If we're interpreting that underscore as sin symbols, then we shouldn't be. Then
that would be my interpretation of what our staff wrote to you. Not once, but hold on. Not once, but twice. And you've asked us to interpret it, and you just answered my question. So I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We appreciate your comments.
Sure.
I do have another public speaker on this item, Dr. Baelish.
Sorry for my not very good English. Maybe in auditory have Russian interpreter. Maybe not. Okay. I'm very old. I 81 year now, and I live in Park Regency near this building, where 10 building, and 30%, 35% seniors live. Many bus stop, no bench. It's very bad. No bench. You can see. This no bench, next no bench, no. Then, next question. I understand that this meeting about better transportation. You in future you must better transportation, bus and other transportation. And now from shop center to BART station, Pleasant Hill, only one stop. Very long way. Very long way. Is this not very good for seniors? Understand? Many bus number, and I know because I live in United States 10 years. No bench and stop. Often bus go with wait. Very often wait come to stop. Earlier go from BART station. I know, I see number 9, number 18, number 15, number 11. Often go earlier, then must go and come later, then will become. Understand? I call next time, anytime to transportation apartment. No answer. I take this paper 5 times. I think that I cannot every time come to your meeting. Today I come because yesterday, 2 weeks ago, I see that very often later come, early leave from BART station. This is not good.
So they're not following the schedule.
Very must question. Bench. Every stop must be bench for senior, for other people. This very important question.
We appreciate your
Sorry
comments.
for my bad English.
No, I think we got it. We got it. You need a bench because the bus is not on time. And it's either early or it's late.
In my country, I worked 40 years as a chief ophthalmology surgery in Ukraine, in city Odessa. Now I don't work. 81 year old.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're coming to tell us what needs to be fixed. We appreciate that, and the person whose city that is occurring in will take that message back to the appropriate
Actually, Madam
agency.
Chair, that is an unincorporated county.
So, okay, county supervisors.
So if Denise will send that information to my office, I will connect this gentleman with the Transit Authority. I can tell you, sir, that you're not going to get a bench at every bus stop. But I will do what I can to connect you with the appropriate staff. It's another agency. This agency does not handle the buses, but you live in unincorporated Pleasant Hill. So if Denise can send me that information, I'll have a member of my staff get in touch with you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bielich. We appreciate your comments, and I see that you've turned in a card for the next item as well. So we will deal with that in a few minutes. All right. I have no other public speaker cards on item 4810.
Madam Chair, I will move the item supporting staff on this issue and awarding the contract to Brossemer and Wall.
Okay. Do you want to include the approval of the other items that were listed in the recommendation, or just the
Yes,
whole
I'm sorry.
recommendation?
I'm going back and forth on my iPad here, but that's the item as listed on the agenda is my motion.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have a motion by Mitchoff, and I believe the second was by Arnerich. Okay, further comments, Tom?
I just wanted to give this gentleman an A for creativity. I've looked at bids for decades, and I've never seen this issue come up before, so I appreciate him bringing it to our attention, but it's not going to fly.
Okay, thank you. That said, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? That carries unanimously by those present. Thank you all very much. We will return to the first item on our agenda, which is item 3.1. And that is an update on the stakeholder input from the Regional Transportation Committees and the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee and the Public Engagement Program. And again, I will, say, if there are anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this item, please fill out a speaker card and give it to Lindsay, who just delivered another sack to me, and she will collect them and bring them up here. I also have a speaker card on item 6.4 toward the end of the agenda as well. So with that, Ross, would you like to kick off this report?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Maybe we need to start a watch. I didn't expect it, but Ivan may beat me on that one for time, so we'll have to see on that. This item is an information item to update you on the progress of developing a transportation expenditure plan. So I'll spell it out first and then use TEP throughout the rest of my report for a potential future transportation sales tax measure. And again, as we have in the past, I want to reiterate for the public and the present here tonight, anyone listening online, that we have not yet made a decision on whether we're going to proceed for a transportation sales tax measure, and if we do that, what ballot that would be on. So we just want to reiterate the fact that we are still in discussions for that purpose. But tonight is an important discussion in determining if we need to be considering, or what we need to think about to consider working towards the 2016 ballot, and that's the schedule we have been working on, or if there are other factors that we should be considering and talking about that would lead us to reassess our approach or to reassess our schedule, or potentially both. So specifically, we want to ask you to listen to the update. I know you've all read the staff report. I trust that. And have a discussion about current and potential challenges, and then I'm going to ask you ultimately to provide staff with some direction on how we wish to proceed over the next several months. I do want to inform you that there is feeling amongst the TEP ad hoc committee that changes are needed, and again, I've outlined most of those, or I believe I've outlined most of those in the staff report. And as I go through my oral report here, I will share
some new information that we learned yesterday and how that could affect our discussion here tonight. So, all right, with that set up, I'd like to provide a high-level overview of the report, and then we'll ask for your direction. And as Chair Pierce has been saying, I'm sure we'll hear a lot from the public on this topic as well. So, as we all know, we've been working under your direction on activities that would lead to the development of a transportation expenditure plan since about March of this year. At our meeting last month, we talked about the approach and timeline for keeping the transportation expenditure plan development in sync with development of the countywide transportation plan, or the CTP, and that's really going to be a lot of our discussion today. And we've set up a plan so that both of those together would drive to a schedule that we intend to meet so that we could be ready for the 2016 ballot if that's what we choose to do. So page 1 through 6 outlines most of what we've done today, focusing on the stakeholder input, and I'm not here to rehash that today, but I would like to point out that new material is included in Attachment B. We've talked previously about the RTPC input. Last month I spent quite a bit of time talking about where we are with EPAC, but Attachment B is a report on our TEP public outreach program conducted by Lindsay and her consultants. And you also have a handout in your packet as well. Our telephone town hall held last Thursday for the WICTAC region wasn't ready, or a summary of that telephone town hall wasn't ready when the packet was being prepared for mail out. So you can see some of the statistics and some of the priorities included in that report. Very briefly, I can just say about that is that the input received through the TEP process is very consistent with what we heard in 2014 when we were going through the countywide transportation plan. I think I counted the top 5. Pothole repair was number 1. BART parking and other BART improvements. People like BART. Bike lanes were within the top 5. Transit options on the 680 corridor and other highway improvements. And traffic light synchronization. So that's what I counted as the top 5 from the direct public input. That information with some polling information that we've conducted over the last couple of years really give us a good sense, or we believe it gives us a good sense of what the public wants through a potential measure. And again, if you want to discuss public engagement program in more detail, either Lindsay or I can do that after we go through my report here. Relative to the schedule we discussed last month, I do need to update you that we've missed a milestone since that point in time. And that's a lot of what we'll talk about here, and we'll want to see how that affects us going forward. As we discussed last month, we intended to release an initial draft of a TEP by November 4th. The timing of that was for several items, most significant being that draft TEP would have formed the 4th transportation investment option that would have been analyzed as part of the environmental impact report for the countywide transportation plan. We didn't release that draft for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, despite what I talked about with RTPC input and with the public input, we really hadn't completed our public engagement process so that we felt we had a plan that really had the kind of stakeholder consensus, or at least some level of consensus that we wanted in that plan. I've been saying that my hope was that by November we'd have 85% agreement, by January we'd have 95% agreement, we'd hone that in by May so that we could hopefully have pretty broad consensus. With the input we have received through the RTPCs, some input from unsolicited input actually from BART, Transit Operators, Public Managers Association, we were starting to see that we really didn't have consistency in the requests, and we hadn't yet had the time to go out and try to resolve those differences amongst the various groups. And again, as we discussed last month, we were unable to facilitate a discussion amongst the EPAC that would have provided a recommendation from them as originally intended. So I've included in the staff report on page 5 a graphic where we're looking at input from those three main sources, the RTBCs, EPAC, the public, and then it's up to staff and the board in front of me here to reconcile that for something that we could put out with the public. We made despite the fact that we didn't have the level of consensus that we thought we would have by this point in time, we did make a conscious decision that we would need to daylight this initial draft TEP by November 4th. And again, that was really to try to keep the TEP and CTP schedules in sync. Probably rushing a few things, and in hindsight, maybe we didn't need to do that. But again, being good staff and consultants, we developed that initial draft TEP and started to discuss that with small groups of some of the stakeholders. And I do need to report that I don't think we got very good reception from pretty much anybody as we daylighted that. It seemed that folks were probably focusing more on what they didn't like than what they liked, which was opposite of what we were hoping. We had hoped that people would see enough in there that they liked, and that would keep everybody working at the table. And so maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was a little bit surprised from that. Some of the groups were some smaller breakout groups from the EPAC, and again, since we didn't really have consensus from that group, we didn't get. They really didn't want to review yet what we had. We met with a small group from the Public Managers Association and with BART, and if you remember, each of them asked for about a third of the measure, and we weren't finding a way to provide a third in the initial draft, so we got quite a bit of pushback from those groups. Other examples related to transit, some of the major congested corridors, and quite a bit of discussion that we had last month about some of the policy considerations that were being proposed by some of the stakeholders. Again, a number of the folks didn't necessarily care how the expenditure plan part worked through the process. They really wanted to impose some policy changes into the process. So ultimately, we decided amongst staff and amongst the ad hoc committee that it might be detrimental to release that plan in the current state that it was. So that's really what got us here tonight. So for the rest of my discussion, I'll focus on some of what I'm calling key observations, starting on page 7 of your report. And most significant, and where I'll spend most of my time, are some of the challenges related to completing the countywide transportation plan concurrently with the transportation expenditure plan. I think we can all remember that we started work to update the countywide transportation in 2012 with a goal of completing that by 2014. We've all been through a couple of fits and starts in that process, and at our last board meeting, we said we would work towards a 2016 update of the countywide transportation plan. So number of factors have contributed to that, and part of the discussion I want to have as I wrap up here is that approach helping or hurting our efforts towards a transportation expenditure plan. Some of the things that have happened since we've begun our process, MTC adopted new guidelines that reflected changes in law, specifically SB 375 and Sustainable Community Strategies approach to planning. We went through a debate on that and decided to adopt new guidelines midstream in the process, and we're working towards that. We're now including an equity analysis. We've included financially constrained project lists and several other requirements that are in the new guidelines. So we think we're okay. But one question that keeps coming up over and over from some stakeholder groups relates to our modeling approach, and that's the model itself, and then how we're using the inputs and outputs of that model into our analysis. Part of what's coming out, it's clear to us that certain interest groups believe that the requirements for a regional transportation plan should be pushed down to the countywide plan level, something that's very difficult. I know Martin's described that in the past, that a broader region-wide plan, you can get better perspectives on a longer view than you might be able to on a more localized plan. So we believe that the law is clear, that there are different requirements, and we've been working our way through that. But there is an interesting discussion that occurred yesterday that we do want to share, and it's something that's not in the staff report. So a number of us attended the Focus on the Future conference earlier this week, and some of us, including Chair Pierce, sat through what I thought was a very interesting panel discussion from staff from several other counties that are contemplating going to the ballot on maybe the same timeline that we've been talking about. And the name of that session was Adapting Sales Tax Measures to Changing Policy Goals. So it was interesting in that I heard a lot of things that sound very familiar with the landscape here in Contra Costa, and heard a lot of good ideas that we may want to adopt into our process. Again, many of these policy changes have occurred since the mid-2000s, and that's really when the last round of measures were passed prior to the Great Recession. So this is the next wave of counties talking about sales taxes, so we're all kind of learning together that things have changed in the last 10 years or so. And then an example that I wanted to share here is with the San Diego Association of Governments, SANDAG. They're also contemplating a new measure, but you may recall they also have a cloud over their head with a lawsuit that they're working on over their their previous long-range plan. You may recall that Gary Gallegos, our executive director, attended a board meeting back in 2013 and described some of the legal challenges that had been filed against their environmental impact report to the first regional transportation plan, sustainable community strategies adopted in the state under the new law, and that was back in 2011. Many things that were interesting about the lawsuit that's now on its way to the California Supreme Court, but we got an interesting update from Gary about the status of the EIR for a new regional transportation plan. So concurrent with defending their lawsuit, the clock was ticking on a new plan, so they've been working on their next round of regional transportation plan, sustainable community strategies. They worked through the process, released our EIR on October 9th of this year, and last Thursday was the end of the 30-day review process on that EIR, and they didn't get any challenges. So they're in the process of adopting a new plan while their old plan is still being tied up in court, and kind of interesting. I don't know that I'd want to be in their shoes, but it's interesting. So Julie, as part of the panel discussion, asked Gary Gallegos to share his thoughts on some of the things that SANDAG did differently this round that did not result in the challenges that they saw in the last environmental document. A couple of things Gary cited. One of them was that SANDAG and many of their other peer agencies, particularly the bigger MPOs, had changed their modeling approach to what's referred to as an activity-based model. This allows for more precise modeling of personal travel choices, individual trips, and an increased sensitivity towards changes in those travel choices, so more sensitive of cars versus bikes versus transit, et cetera. And then they also negated some of the arguments upheld by the Court of Appeals in determining the level of significance for greenhouse gas reduction. So previously, SANDAG used thresholds that were established in SB 375, so these are specific reduction targets by 2020 and 2035. Well, later in, I think it was 2005, the governor also issued an executive order that had a reduction target of 2050. So do we comply with the law in SB 375, or do we also need to comply with what's in the executive order? So that's also part of what's included in the case that's going to the Supreme Court. So at any rate, to get things through, it's my understanding that SANDAG's now including an analysis towards the target reductions included in the executive order and mitigation strategies for that, even though they believe the executive order doesn't apply. So that's kind of the interesting thing. But they are going to continue with their lawsuit. That's going to affect them in the future. It could affect MTC and others as they develop their regional transportation plan. And depending on the outcome of the Supreme Court, we know that it could affect the regional transportation plan, and then potentially it could even affect what happens for guidelines for the countywide transportation plan. I don't believe there's a date set yet for the Supreme Court to hear the case, so we'll have to learn more about that and ultimately see if these requirements do trickle down to the countywide plans. We're already concerned about potential legal challenges to the CTP, and again, we don't know if the outcome of the Supreme Court could increase the likelihood for challenges or potentially could reduce likelihood for those challenges. So maybe we should wait and see. Regardless of that, what's starting to come into focus is that staff believes that proceeding with the TEP, which does not require an EIR, and a CTP, which does require an EIR, may not make sense. We may want to really think about completing one first, one or the other first, but we do not believe we should proceed together. Some of the other things outlined in my staff report, I'll just mention them, and they may be items that we'll want to agendize for future meetings. This, again, is an information item, looking for your direction, but if depending on the schedule going forward in the process, we would like to get some clear direction on policy considerations from the board here. One is the urban limit line. We've talked about that a little bit in the past. The ad hoc committee discussed that and believes that the current provisions in Measure J should remain, and we'd like to confirm that with the full board, but we'll have to do that in an agendized item in the future. We'd also think that it'd be helpful to the process to get a collective sense from this body on things like the return to source level of funding, funding for BART, and other things that staff and our consultants are wrestling with, but without getting some clear guidance where you guys sit, we're probably just going to continue to get different groups posturing, and we really need to start focusing on some of those. The other things outlined in the report really are some administrative housekeeping items we'll probably want to talk about, but I don't think any of those really rise to the level of at least the three items that I've mentioned here today. So with that, I think I'd like to just stop talking, listen to the comments from public, listen to your comments, and try to address any questions you may have about where we are and thoughts that staff has about options.
Just a matter of information, the last briefs in Sandag were filed yesterday. So, because I'm following that pretty closely. And so that means oral argument in 3 to 6 months and a decision 3 to 6 months after that. So we're looking at a year out.
That was the indication we got from Gary Gallegos as well. And I would suggest that somewhere along the road we invite him back to tell us more about their experience with their second RTP, which actually went through, or their SCS, which went through very smoothly, and the changes they made in between, because it was fascinating to listen to him. And Ross and I were both there, but we can't represent it nearly as well as the guy who did it. So I would suggest that would be a good idea for a future meeting. I think Gary would be more than happy to come back and share those ideas with us. I will also share with you that there, among the other speakers that we heard, there were, even from the wrap-up by the executive directors on the DS in the last day, they were talking about the potential for changes from Sacramento, which are going to make our processes more onerous than they already are. There's apparently one requirement even that snuck through that nobody seemed to catch, that added required language to the ballot title itself, which will make a change in what we have to include there, and it's going to be something that's going to be difficult to manage. So there were a lot of issues we heard. There were a lot of suggestions by many folks that it's going to be a very crowded ballot in 2016, but that if you're not on it, you may lose your opportunity for good. So I think we need to have kind of a come to Jesus decision on where we want to go and what's important to us and how we want to get there. And so I will kick off the option for discussions. Don, you want to kick that off?
Well, one, I want to thank everybody who's been involved in this, the ad hoc committee, staff, our advisors, EPAC members. I mean, everyone is obviously working hard. I think each of us is committed to coming up with something that works. And it strikes me, when you look at all the polling data, regardless of when we take the poll, is that the public expects us to serve them. As I read the report, despite all the hard work, I think we are at risk of letting the public down. And I certainly don't think we ought to be doing that. And I sort of interpreted the report as a do we want to proceed or not kind of question. And my vote, at least for tonight, would be that we proceed, but I think that we need, as a board, to consider a variety of changes. I mean, one of the reasons for proceeding is that in the county, we're the only agency that is likely to generate funds to address countywide or issues that cross jurisdictional lines. If Lafayette passes a sales tax, I'm not sure we're going to be doing a lot for traffic coming out of Pleasant Hill. If Danville passes a sales tax, I don't know how much of that is going to help traffic coming from San Ramon or vice versa. But if we as an authority act, then we can do something that helps the county. And it doesn't preclude, in most cases, individual cities from acting on their own. I'm at this meeting tonight. Tomorrow night, I'm at a meeting just in Lafayette looking at our own sales tax measure. I don't see them as being in conflict. However, having said that, I would just toss out some things that we may need to do differently. As Ross points out, we've postponed or canceled one EPAC meeting, and so we are behind what was already a pretty tight schedule. And as an authority, we rely on the ad hoc committee and staff to give us updates, and they meet and they're working hard. But with time running out, one suggestion I would toss out is that we take this up as a committee of the whole, as opposed to having an ad hoc committee that reports to the full authority. I recognize that may mean more meetings, but it also may mean that we can take action faster and try and make up some of the time that we've lost. I think the other thing we're hearing is that everyone has been very good at stating their position regarding the expenditure plan, the growth management plan, whatever you want to talk about, but we haven't seen the compromises that we're going to need. And if you look at page, I think 5 that Ross alluded to, it was constructed the right way. We were looking for the suggestions to bottom up, and they have. And essentially, while we don't have an expenditure plan in front of us, we have the suggestions, and they don't add up to $2.3 billion. They add up to something more. And so now maybe we've reached the time where the authority needs to come back and essentially take on all this feedback and lead and go back and to various people and say, everyone's going to have to make some kind of compromise, because 10% or 15% of something is a whole lot better than 40% of zero. As I have said before, there are a lot of organizations in this county who are strong enough to defeat a measure. No organization is strong enough to pass it. And unless everyone sort of adheres to that message, what we will have is no measure. It sounds like we have an opportunity to delink the CTP and the Transportation Expenditure Plan, and if that exists, I think we ought to take it. And I think also, as we meet, if we decide to meet as a committee of the whole, I think nothing about the approach we take going forward is a sacred cow. And maybe after we do this for a while, we will conclude that 2016 isn't the right time to do it. But I don't think, at least for me, that tonight is anywhere near the right time to make that decision.
Thank you, Don. I would agree with everything you just had to say, including something else that I heard down south, and we are going to get to public comment because we're not going to even make a motion until we hear from the public. So I want to make that really clear. But I want some of you to hear kind of what we're feeling before you make those comments, so you can give us your feedback to that as well. One of the things I heard at Focus was a lot of folks are looking at doing expenditure plans differently than they ever have before. Instead of dusting off Measure J and that list, they're thinking about doing things completely differently. And I think we need to be open to that as well and get creative about what really serves our constituents directly. And we've heard some of that. How we manage it is something we've got to figure out. But I think we need to not just try to do the same thing we've done before by moving just a few numbers around. I think we really need to be innovative and looking at the future, and that's something that's going to take some creativity and some innovation. And I think we have an opportunity to do something that is really monumental for our county and looks forward to what we can do for our kids and grandkids. And that's what I heard at the conference we just attended. So I will go on around the table. Newell?
Well, thank you, Julie and Dawn. First of all, I appreciate Ross. I mean, he's sitting there in a very difficult position. And when I read this report, and I read it twice, you can just feel the emotion that was in that. It was really well written. And it was a sincere, honest, we need to do something different. I represent all the 19 cities, and I see this just an opportunity to fix some things. And I have a little different suggestions from some very specific things. But first of all, I think we've gotten some information, and we know we have to decouple. I think one of the things that kind of prejudices the process, it wasn't intentional, it was about how to make a schedule. Trying to do environmental work and do what are our projects going to be in a way that environmental work is kind of dictating, well, we're doing this, aren't we? And you know what? That's not the way we normally do that. Normally what you do is you come up with all the ideas, you vet that list, and then you say, this is what we're going to do the environmental work on. Because it's stronger work, it's clear, that's the message, and we know where we're headed. Trying to do it parallel and making adjustments, there's a lot of risk to that, as we say. I think the other area that put a undue burden, and I don't think we should have done this, was throwing out an expenditure plan to the EPAC was like saying, how do I say this correctly? They had all these great ideas, and then somebody says, thanks for your ideas. By the way, here's what we want to do. And you know what? There's a disconnect there. I don't think that should have been their responsibility. I think what we were after as a group was to hear from the community and all the constituents and the stakeholders about what are the important values. And amongst that group, to see was there consensus on that. Part of the way you get to consensus is how you facilitate that, but it's also setting the criteria and the willingness to say, this is your goal. You must come up with a consensus in these areas. And then that information comes back to us. So I have a suggestion that I think that's maybe a way to retool that EPAC to say what's really important is your values. Why are these important? And give them a criteria of how to evaluate that, and not in the expenditure plan. I think that expenditure plan should come back to us as an entire board. I actually suggest we not have a subcommittee doing this. This is too important. We all represent different constituencies. We, with our county folks, all of us representing, it's too small of a group, and it has, from the outside looking in, it has a look like it's just based on what those people sitting at the table want to happen. And that begins to get people to start to go to others, and we start falling apart. Be more transparent. Vet that here. Let us hear that input. Let us hear from those constituent groups. We come up with a recommendation, and then we're going to be back in a similar way, but in a very different aspect than last time, is that people are going to have to weigh in and say, I can support this, and we're going to have to go through that give and take. But I don't think we can expect, we were all somehow thinking that just would magically happen with the EPAC. And you know what? That can't. That's not their job. Their job is to say, this is important to me and why it's important. And we're getting them to start argue about, well, if we don't get 15 or 20% off the top now, I'm not talking. We need the input of what are the creative ideas, and I think our experiences of managing this, and some have been around here for 25 years, some of us for 8 or 9, we have enough experience to use that judgment, representing our groups and representing all of our constituents, which is the entire million people that live here, to basically help organize that. And we can take the heat, the push, the rub, and do it through a more formal process that I think we can do that. And I agree with Dawn, we have a technical issue here on how the legislation was written and what we can or cannot do. We need to be partners. We need to get that cleared up before we take any more time. Otherwise, we need to have a clear answer. But yeah, and we need to have that willingness to make sure that we're all on that same page. So I think it's not time to quit. I think it's an opportunity to retool, and this is to everybody. And I'm glad we're getting to say this before we hear from the public, because I think they ought to hear from all of us so that they can comment on that and not wait till we're done and we get our say and they never get to share that. So I think the cities all have a vested interest. We all have serious needs. But, I still look back. If you look at page 14, there's the lower chart there shows what people wanted. Now, you have to know that that was a biased chart. And the reason why it was biased, now the number one item on there that people said we want done, number one, over everything else, pave our roads, fix potholes. Last on the list was more buses to BART. So 346% difference. The next thing on there was BART parking. That was 20% higher. But the way we summarize that is a lesson in statistics. If I put 5 questions on there that are for one category and I put 1 question for the other, well, of course, this is going to be 5 times more important than that. We have done things, we weren't as transparent, that we didn't balance things as much. And I guess in what I'm asking the EPAC to do, everybody represents a different constituency, but we have to find a way to balance it. This is one of the few agencies that took the risk, and there are a lot of people say, you don't legally have this right, but we did. We took the risk to tie development and growth to transportation dollars. Now, that now seems like, of course, that's the way you do it. No, it wasn't. That was a big deal. We fought battles to get to that, and I think we're all proud of that. And you know what? It's still in place, and it hasn't been challenged yet. Somebody keeps talking about one of those, but it hasn't happened in all these years. So I think we should feel really proud of that. That is our guiding thing. Trying to reinvent all of those things, I think we ought to focus on what are the real things. It took me an hour and 20 minutes at 3 o'clock today to get from Oakland to Danville. It was an ordinary day. There were no accidents. There was no Caltrans disruptions. It's a normal day. We live in a world where we can't. What can we do with this transportation plan in the near future? I don't want to be dead and be buried, and maybe I can dream, think maybe they did do something. We need to solve that problem because the Bay Area is the driving force of the United States and for the world in some ways, because we can get people to live, work, get to work. We are choking ourselves to death. So I hope we take the opportunity, move forward.
I wish we could fix the commute coming our direction in the evening, but I don't think that's going to be in our purview. It took me an hour and 45 minutes to do it at 4 o'clock. Bob?
I'll tell you what I did. And talk about fight traffic. I'm Brentwood. I can't get much further away from here. So I took we have a map in my office, all of Contra Costa County. And I'm going through everything Ross had said in the staff report. And I said, you know what? If we take all the various groups, you line them on the right side, all the issues, you put them on the left side, so I'm gonna do a painting. And the painting's going to be Contra Costa County. And how many colors do I need to go to get this painting done? Well, I need the rainbow. So what happened? The painting shouldn't be one color. The painting has to be every color in the rainbow because it represents everyone. I'm intrigued with bikes. I'm intrigued with the greenery, greenhouse gas. I'm intrigued with all of it, and all of it has a color. Every group is of significance, and every group is important. I tried to eliminate about half of you. The painting wouldn't have been completed. We need to go. I'm very conscientious because I've just sat in traffic for years. I thought it was a common thing to do. But then I went to Danville to a mayor's conference, and that's ridiculous. I thought Brentwood was terrible. I couldn't get out of Brentwood, and then I couldn't get in Danville. So as a farmer in the country, Brentwood, it's a beautiful painting, but it takes every color of the rainbow. So I know that's probably crazy for you guys to hear me say that, but I tried to make it a wonderful farm color painting, and it took every color, and it took togetherness to do it all. So we need to go because everybody's important. I know. Is that all right to put it in that word?
I like it. I'm bringing the brushes, though.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's got to be a go, and we'll figure it out. This board is not that stupid. We're pretty smart. At times, you might not think so, but we're pretty good, and we do care. And I can tell you right now, everybody cares for everybody out there, the whole county. That's why we're here. I'll shut up.
Okay, any other comments before I take public comment? Oh, I'm sorry, David?
I apologize for laughing. I was thinking Picasso Cubist painting as you were talking. I do. Let me just a couple of things real quickly. One is the task that I think we gave to Ross and to the committee was a monumental one in an ever-changing, ever more complex world. I think we knew at the time when we said, look, let's create a committee and throw everybody into it who might want to have a say in this, that there was a danger here, that in trying to create or get consensus from a group with that much disparate thought, with that many different ideas, without a really substantial period of time to hash through all the difficult issues, was not necessarily the most efficient and effective way to get to success. Having said that, efficiency is sometimes overrated. What we were sort of constrained by in terms of the notion of time and the ticking clock, if we were going to do a measure in 2016, I think created itself an artificial barrier to success with a process that really was designed to try to get people talking and looking at each other's issues. What was most saddening to me, frankly, as I heard from different people on the committee and as I reviewed materials that were coming out of it, was that one of the things that I've always loved about the way this county operates is it doesn't tend to operate the way the federal government process does. There tends to be sort of a sense in it, and it still operates, by the way, with this board, which gives me great hope. The way that the United States Senate used to work, which was that people sat down and they talked and they worked things out. And they understood that we were in a grand common enterprise that required compromise and conversation, not position taking and drawing lines at early phases and never moving. That, sadly, is ultimately what gets us to where we are on the national scene, which is gridlock, confusion, nothing really good coming out of it, and a lot of good people wasting a lot of time. So I was disappointed to see that, that had sort of that feeling had sort of crept into this. So I agree. It's clear we have to do something different, and we have to look at this in a bit of a different way. And frankly, I would rather not rush. If the real issue is that if we really think that there's no hope of getting something on a future ballot that's going to be sensible, then maybe the enterprise itself is not sensible. Now, I'm also something of a dreamer, so I think that it's useful sometimes to chase things that aren't sensible. But we are in a situation, we are in a county that is very diverse, with regions and cities and the county itself that all have very, very different needs and desires. There's only one pot of money. There's only one sort of pool of blocks to build with. And if everybody wants to take their own blocks and go over into their separate part and sort of stay there, we never get there. In one sense, there's way too much focus on highways and cars, and there always will be, because that's kind of what the public really focuses on in lots of ways. And they're reasonable and right to do so, because the public is the folks that are sitting there stuck in traffic. And we all know, it's been said a gazillion times, we can never, pave our way out of the problem that we have. That'll save it, so that we don't have to drive an hour and 20 minutes from one, almost the county to the center of the county, right? But at the same time, I think we also have to figure out that the grander vision of all of this is that we're trying to improve the overall transportation system. That means you can't ignore highways, and you can't ignore pavement. You can't ignore transit, and you can't ignore the changing demographics of our county. You have to consider, why do we have so many single occupant vehicles on the road? What services aren't being provided in other ways today that make that so that that's a necessary impediment to this place working in a better way from a transit or a transportation system perspective? Why is it that we have to have a scenario or a situation where somebody who's elderly who needs to get to a hospital is trapped with only one or two forms of transportation because there's not a whole lot of other stuff available? And why is it that the people around us have created new and different ways of moving people through our county, whether it's Uber or Lyft or a dozen other things that have cropped up to fill a void because people can't move from here to there the way that they want to and need to. And so I really think it's incumbent on us to kind of keep that bigger picture in mind, that this is really all about people movement and goods movement and the efficiency of the system itself, not necessarily the efficiency of the process. So I'll stop with that for now. Thank you.
Gail?
November 2016 is 1 year away from now. And because it is a year, I think it would be, I agree with those speakers who've gone before me, that it would be wrong at this point to just give up. I think we still have time. We really do have time. As you know, BART is also considering a measure, and we also are in kind of the same state of flux. We don't have a plan put together yet, and we are working on that. But I thought in the benefit of transparency, because some of these things have been going on behind the scenes, I should tell you what BART has been doing with the authority. We've met with Randy and Ross and Julie and a subgroup of us to talk about how we could be creative in being complementary. BART cannot get cars from a bond measure. It's prohibited to put that into a bond measure. So we've been advocating that the authority might be able to put the BART cars in, and we at BART could fund some things that the authority needs and wants as long as they have a nexus to BART. So we could trade off that way and be partners in that way. In the paragraph on page 9, it talks about equity among the counties. And our general manager is very sensitive to that. She's gone to Art Dow in Alameda County. She's gone to Tilly in San Francisco and talked about the fact that everybody shares in the benefits of the BART system, and that Contra Costa isn't going to put up with being the only one looking at the BART cars. So she's trying to put together a package where each of the counties would have a share of that. Now, that hasn't come together yet, but I just want you to know that we're hearing these things and we're trying to be responsive to it so that we can be your partner. As you can see from the information on the public responses, BART is very attractive to people. I think it would be a benefit to this measure as well as ours. And so I would hope that you would continue to work on this. It may not come together, but I think it's too early to decide that, and we want to be a partner in that.
Thanks, Gail. Anything, Kim? Well, okay. Well, I know, but we're kind of going around the table so I can keep track, so.
You know, I think we all, when we did our initial polling year and a half ago, 2 years ago, as we saw these wonderful numbers come out where everyone was really impressed with the job that we were doing, that we got the idea that this would be a good idea to go back to the public in 2016 with an extension of the measure. And based on those polls, it probably still is. And I'm pretty sure the public is still pretty impressed with the work that we're doing. But I think I want to try to get as specific as we can in our recommendations to you right now. Definitely, I think sort of what I've heard somewhat of the consensus is that we split the TEP and the transportation plan. My recommendation would be that we do the TEP, we finish the TEP first. We go back to the group and we say, okay, now we've kind of come to a gridlock here. We've come to an issue here where we can't make up our mind. We're battling over this. We'll give you 2 more meetings to come to some sort of compromise. If you can't reach a compromise, we'll bring that back to this board, and we'll do the compromise on the TEP with that process, and then move on to the county-wide transportation plan, knowing what and where we're going to spend the dollars before we get into it.
Thank you. I'm going to start down there with Chris.
Yes, 3 quick points. One is AC Transit's probably also going out in November 16. What we're going to do is continue an existing parcel tax, so we're not trying to do anything new. We're just trying to keep what we got. A procedural comment and then a dreamer comment. I've attended most of the EPAC meetings, and I agree with the compliments to Russ and his team because they've presented lots of information. But there has been a conflict on the EPAC about whether they're moving numbers around or whether they're talking about values. And I really agree with the gentleman over there that the EPAC should be tasked with coming up with values, not necessarily numbers, but values, and try to knock that around among them. On the dreamer side, and this is above all our pay grades, the problem is we haven't raised the gas tax in almost 30 years. It's lost 2/3 of its value through inflation, another third through electric cars and everything, and we should all be at a 90% PCI paid for by gas taxes, but we don't get to decide that. You don't get to decide that.
Thanks, Chris. Dave?
Yeah, I don't know if I can top the paintbrush thing, but I'm reminded of the statement that Thomas Edison failed 2,000 times to make a light bulb. When he was told that, he said, no, I found 2,000 ways not to make a light bulb. And I think we've just gone through 1 and 2, so we still got another 1,900 plus. I have to take exception to one thing, and I hope I get this out right. And the statement was made, I think David made it, you can't ignore cars and traffic and all these other things. Well, that's a big part of the problem. Yes, we are. I mean, the people on the EPAC were on their own direction, and they are ignoring what's in front of us right now. And if we continue to do it, instead of looking outside the box, as was asked earlier, we're going to move to 3 and 4 and 5 ways not to make that light bulb. And I hope the message is clear, because that's very close to losing 2016 and 2018 and, who knows what. And I think we're better than that.
Thank you, Dave. Janet?
Excuse me. I think what we're supposed to do tonight is not make a decision, but provide information, and then we'll do a decision-making process in a later process where it's properly agendized. Having said that, people tonight are seeming pretty prescriptive in terms of what they see as the process, but I have to say that I feel like my part of the county is pretty well left out of what I've been hearing by many of the comments, and that kind of feels like it usually happens, and I think part of the reason it happens is not because anyone is out to get anyone or doesn't like anyone or anything like that. It's got to do with the layout of our county and the the mountainous ranges and the roadways and so forth. It just doesn't work. So when we talk about the whole county, usually that leaves us out in my part of the world, West County. And if you can use that as a model for a lot of things that go on, not just what I'm there talking about, but many of the processes, we can't, I don't think, come up with in a measure something where everything works for everybody. I think it just doesn't. And I think what we have to do is come up with a measure where, in fact, there is something in there for everyone, and they need to, and people need to be able to feel like there's something there for them too, and that we don't hear these comments like, this is great for the whole county, when in fact it probably isn't. Now, some things maybe are, maybe like, if you have return to source and you give a certain percent to every single jurisdiction, yeah, we have in fact done that. But that's kind of maybe where it stops in terms of being that way. So I think we need to be careful in whatever we do that we look towards all parts of the county. Then I think it's also really important, if we want to win the measure, that we think about it logistically, like when can you go out and when can you most likely win a measure and when can you most likely fail, And what I think we know, and what I think those who run elections know, is that we're coming in 2016 upon a time when we're most likely to win. So if we don't do it then, we don't get another shot at it for 4 years. And I think we just need to be realistic that way. And I don't think we do that well at the ballot place, that we can afford to play around with that one too much. So we need to be really careful. And personally, I'm here because I want to make it happen, and I want to see it happen, and I want there to be something in here for everybody. Now, everybody can't have everything they want. I think we all know that. We would like it if maybe they could, but they can't. And so we need to do the best job we can with the limited resources that will always be the only thing available to us. But having said that, I think we need to resolve some of the issues about things like SB 375 and things like that. When I look at the list provided by the RTPCs, I think I think those are interesting lists, and it's interesting in that some of them have a lot in common, and some things on them that are very different. So I think we just need to be really thoughtful about that, and work really hard and efficiently to try and make it happen. And we need to be mindful that we need to be talking about what we want to do as opposed to just talking, for example. And I'll just leave it at that. And with the assumption that tonight, what we're going to do is direct this towards an agenda item at a future meeting. Is that true?
I think we're giving staff direction on where we want to head so they know whether to wrap it up in a bow and pack it off or whether to plow ahead.
You mean whether to stop it? Yes,
I
okay.
think the
Because that
decision
is to
tonight
me-
is go forward or not.
Okay, because it says information. That's
I
why
understand. I
that's
know,
why I'm
we're just
asking
giving
that
direction
question. Okay.
on what we want to see at our
Okay,
next
I'm
meeting.
finished speaking. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen?
I'll save my comments till after public comment.
Okay. Federal.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of smart people in this room, from staff to the board itself, our consultants that's worked towards this. And I think the timing is now. But that now timing doesn't work unless the leaders within this room set aside the parochial attitude that exists in this room. Now, everyone's sitting here and they're saying the same things, but then when they leave this room, the message is much different depending on the constituency in which they're talking to. And so we need to take the time as a group, if we plan to go forward and be successful, to get on the same page. And unfortunately, we haven't got on the same page. We were fortunate in the last measure to be able at 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe that's the case, let's get everyone tired to the point where they just don't give a damn anymore. But I think the thing is that we really got to get on the same page. Our leadership has to be consistent, the message has to be consistent, so we need to look at what the greater needs is, set priorities around those needs, and sell it to our community. Sell it to the community because it's a realistic approach to to meeting the needs of Contra Costa in areas that really need to be impacted. There's another huge problem out there. Whenever you have projects and programs, you're never going to have enough money to fix everything. So, that's something that we have to deal with. There's a conversation to be had there. But we got to start talking. We need to start talking to stakeholders early. We need to get people on the same page, and we need to go for 2016, because if we can't convince people in a presidential election that this is needed, and if we can't talk to our cities, as we did with the Board of Supervisors, says, now is not our time, we will hold off and allow that the Transportation Authority would go forward now, and then we'll come back later and look at a measure. We need those type of commitments. And unless those are in place and our leadership leaves this room and go out and start to sell what it is we're trying to do, we're not going to be successful. The timing is now. We've got to get busy.
Thank you, Federal. You're so right. Tom?
I think the good news, if there is any, is that we've pretty well identified the issues and the players, and that's a good start for figuring out what we want to do and how we want to do it. I think at the end of the day, for this to be successful, it only has to pass two tests. It has to pass the test at the polls, and it has to be not challenged legally. And if those two things happen, we have a transportation measure. But in terms of getting there, I'm not sure the way we've been going is the best way to proceed. There was some discussion about forming a committee of the whole and everybody working on this. I'm thinking that maybe a better way would be to find one or two or three individuals who are really smart, really understand all the issues, who are honest brokers, who would and this would be like a full-time job. It wouldn't be something that you could do once a month at a meeting with people like us. But anyway, this person or persons would embark on an effort to try to forge a consensus. And among these disparate groups, all of whom want everything, And I think that, you know, a couple of good arguments people have made, or a couple of good arguments to make to anybody, is that part of something is better than all of nothing. We've heard that from several of you before. And the other part of it is that having part of something is really not, it doesn't really have the downsides that people normally attribute to it, because, you know, whether it's a project or a program, and whatever agency you are or constituency you are that are interested in it, some funding gives you an opportunity. If it's a capital project, it gives you an opportunity to get the project designed, get it shovel ready, and go out and look for more money. And, you know, the sources of money we're going to see in the next 10, 20, 30 years are totally different than we saw in the last few decades. You know, we're going to see cap and trade money. You know, the state of California is going to come to grips with transportation somehow. Maybe the federal government will come to grips with it. So I think that if you can get projects started, you can find the money somewhere else to finish them. You don't have to have all the money from this measure to do a whole project. And I think that's a big selling point for some of these people who want, you know, they want 30% of the whole thing or whatever. But I think the other thing, but in addition to trying to get a person or a very small group of people to facilitate this, I think we ought to put a schedule and a time limit on it. You know, give it whatever, 90 days, 4 months, and just tell everybody that, look, we're going to try to forge a consensus. If we can forge a consensus by, you know, 1st of March, 1st of April, name a date, then we're going to go out with this. And if we can't find a consensus, we're not going to do it. And, you know, give them something to realize that they've got to make up their mind, or they're not going to get anything. But I guess I just somehow I don't see this moving forward with a committee of the whole and thinking that all of us, you know, as smart as we are and as talented as we are, that we can resolve this. This is going to take focused, full-time diplomacy on somebody's part to put it together, I think.
Thank you, Tom. I am going to go ahead and go out to our public comment on this item. I have several cards, so I am going to ask you to try to limit your comments to 2 minutes, if you would, please. And we will call first Kenji Yamada. And he will be followed by, if I can get the cards apart, Bruce Olson.
Good evening, Chair Pierce, Authority Board members, and members of staff. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Kenji Yamada. I'm an organizer with Bike Concord. You may remember our comments from the last Authority Board meeting. I appreciate that the public was allowed to hear comments from the board on this item before making our own, so as to be able to consider and respond to what you all have said. So thank you, Chair Pierce, for directing things that way. I've been attending the EPAC meetings, and I'm sorry that progress towards consensus has been difficult so far. I hope that nevertheless the board is inclined to keep working towards a consensus TEP in time for the 2016 ballot. This funding is badly needed for infrastructure to address safety deficits for non-motor traffic on most of Contra Costa's major streets, as well as pressing needs for seniors, such as the gentleman whom we heard from earlier on the subject of bus benches, and residents with other physical mobility issues. Bike Concord is working closely with Bike East Bay, which is one of the organizations represented on the EPAC, to participate in the TEP process. And we're willing to do our part, both to arrive at a plan that adequately addresses the needs of all stakeholders, and to help persuade Contra Costa voters to approve that plan at the ballot box. I'm interested in Mr. Amrich's suggestion that the EPAC should be retasked with arriving at a list of values that the TEP should serve rather than drafting it themselves. However, I hope that such a method, if it were adopted, would involve at least a few rounds of public feedback and revision to make sure that the public is satisfied that the plan is consistent with its priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenji. The next speaker is Bruce Olson, to be followed by Jim Blickenstaff.
Good evening, Ms. Pierce. Good evening to the board, fellow citizens, staff. I'm Bruce Olson, citizen of Thank you for allowing me to speak. Sacramento is saying, get people out of their cars. We can do this in one of three ways. The problem that we have to solve is there are too many cars on the road, so we want to get people out of their cars. We can build or widen our roads. This is exceedingly expensive and has a long timeline. As you know, this organization exists to do just that. Unfortunately, it's a losing battle so far. Lots of new cars are being built, and people are taking increasing numbers of trips. So, option 2, how do we deal with too many cars on our roads? We can reduce the need for car trips. If you'll allow me a bit of humor, this is ABAG's bag. Get housing and destinations close enough together so that people don't need cars. Alas, this solution is also very expensive and involves a long timeline, plus we're getting pushback from the citizens. Or our third option is, how do we deal with too many cars on our roads, is encourage people to use alternative methods, that is, get around without a car. So we have also three options there. BART, if you'll let me talk a moment about BART. It is running at close to capacity. We could crowd on another 10 or 15%, but adding 300 or 400% more passengers isn't in the cards unless we rebuild the system into a 4-track system. But that has gigantic expense and a long timeline, and we're not even talking about doing that. So alternative 2, how do we deal with too many cars on our roads? Buses. As currently configured, buses are slow because they share the clogged streets with too many cars. Now, we could dedicate traffic lanes to buses only, but that would clog up the streets even more, and people who vote for tax increases wouldn't like that. So, the final alternative that I will speak about tonight, how do we deal with too many cars on our roads, is bicycles. I've left the best to last. To make bicycling a viable option, we need only to stripe bike lanes on our existing streets. Then we need to educate people in how to share the road, motorists as well as bicyclists, and then we need to encourage people to ride bicycles. This will be as easy as any of the other options that you have. It will be a lot less expensive and will have a lot shorter timeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Jim Blickenstaff and then Jim Delano.
Madam Chair, while he's coming up, how many public speakers do we have?
I only have 4 after Mr. Blickenstaff.
Because sometimes it's helpful at our board to have people line up and just to be ready to go.
I understand.
But if you only
That's
have
why
4.
I'm calling the next one behind him.
We call all 4.
I understand.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jim Blickenstaff. I used to be on the City Council in San Ramon, and I'm here representing a coalition in San Ramon, the No HOV Ramps Coalition, and just took the precaution of giving you a list of issues around those ramps in San Ramon in lieu of a 2-minute summary, which wouldn't do it justice. But it's been an ongoing controversial issue in our city since it was technically part of the original Measure J. And we were not, generally speaking, the residents of San Ramon were not aware of that fact until after it was presented on the ballot. And even then, it was hidden behind the headlines of Caldecott Tunnel and improvements on Highway 4 and other things. So I'm representing the group tonight to say go forward. We're not asking for funding for any huge expenditures in San Ramon, we're asking you to not fund a huge expenditure in San Ramon. And maybe in that way it's a good thing. Just very briefly, Norris Canyon Road is the centerpiece of a HOV project. And unfortunately, when you look at the details of that road in San Ramon, it's a neighborhood serving road. It's been that function since day one. And it actually coalesces around that function as an east-west corridor for people in San Ramon to go to take their kids to school or to go to shopping on the other side of the street. And the fact it works is because it's an over-ramp to 680. If you were to actually try to put HOV center lane ramps in that would eliminate it as a local serving road. And the reason it's so valuable as a local serving road is because on the west side, there are hundreds of homes that are utilizing that road as a centerpiece for their commuting to different parts of the city. And like I said, it's historically a local road to the extent that there are a number of houses, I don't know how many dozens, that actually have their driveways that are connected to the road. So as a corridor, it doesn't really work efficiently for a freeway, but it does work well locally. The other problem with that road in terms of it as an original Measure J option that we'd like not to see go forward is that it's only 0.4 miles from Crow Canyon, a major interchange on 680. It's between Crow Canyon and Bollinger Canyon, another major interchange. It's between those two. So you'd have to violate several safety statutes in the state to make it fit properly. And that's just an example of some of the safety issues. So I hope you have a chance to read a lot of the points. It took a while to compile this, and this is on behalf of the No Ramps Coalition. And if you have any questions, you can always find Jim Blickenstaff somewhere in San Ramon at almost any given time.
Very good. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Jim Delano, and if Erica, if you want to come up and be right behind Jim, that would be great. Erica Tan.
Good evening, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight and for all your efforts. And I just want to say, when I came to this meeting originally, I've learned a lot since being here, and I'm grateful that you're all going to reconsider your approach to this. And I just want to thank Ross for all the work that he put in. I'm not sure if he was on the phone on the town hall or not, but I think I recognize his voice.
He was on all of them.
And so, Ross, I'm going to have some comments here, and I'm not throwing you under the bus, so to speak. Okay. And I like the fact that we were able to go online and vote on projects, and then there was a summation, I think that Mr. Arnerich gave that gave the great disparity in the percentages, and we talk about transparency. And one of my concerns, primary concerns at the end of the call, was that it said that, there was 2,000 people on the call. Thank you for all your questions. Those of you whose questions were answered, it will be entered into the record. And so my question would be, what about all the questions that were not answered, because there were lots that were not? And I just hope that there's some sort of and maybe you've done that because you summarized the categories or the buckets of questions, but I hope that those questions that weren't answered are actually entered into where the concerns are. I think that what comes away from that, if it's not, is the impression that the calls were screened and only certain calls came through, and calls that were very easy to be answered. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but I will tell you that that might be the perception that could come out of it. And I was at a transportation committee meeting this week in San Ramon, and I would tell you that one thing that was presented was how wonderful the town halls were, and how what came out of the town halls was lots of questions about express buses. And yet we had someone earlier say that was the lowest thing on the list compared to something else. And so perhaps that's the narrative that someone wants to push forward. And when you talk about transparency and not just representing certain issues, sometimes certain issues just percolate ahead. And so I just want to bring up my one question that wasn't answered, and I'm not looking for an answer this evening. But as I drove here from San Ramon and I hit the bottleneck in Danville Alamo that this body has identified in their studies, most likely by staff, as being a major problem, I ask, in reference to the ramps in San Ramon, why are we going to put vehicles onto I-680 faster so they can get to Danville Alamo and slow down sooner? And I have asked someone on this board why the monies perhaps that are going to the ramps in San Ramon haven't been put towards widening the interstate in Danville and Alamo, because we go from 5 to 4, and then we open back up to 5 after we get past Ignacio. So it's classic bottleneck, right? And I said, why are we not looking at that? And their response was, the political will doesn't exist. And I'll just end my comments at that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jim. I will just answer your question briefly. We are doing an I-680 study, and that's among those things that we are looking at. So we just don't have an answer for you on what that's going to be yet, but we all recognize that bottleneck because most of us get stuck in it at least once a week. So we are looking at that in the study, and we hope to have better answers for you probably within the next year. So thank you. Erica Tan, and then Jerry Grace.
Hi, everyone. I'm terrible with public speaking, so I'm just going to read straight off the laptop. Hope you don't mind. Thanks to each of you for your recommendations. I really admire the board and the staff's wisdom today, especially your eye for innovation and down-to-earthness. I'm glad y'all spoke first because I was feeling way more optimistic now than I did earlier this week upon hearing about the rumored death of the measure. And with that, my name is Erica Tan. I work with Dave Campbell, the Advocacy Director of Bike East Bay, and I would like to say on behalf of our coalition and its members that we fully support working together with CCTA and other involved parties to build consensus and keep Measure J on this year's ballot, if possible. As Don mentioned earlier, the regional connectivity is so pivotal, especially when it comes to less represented transportation modes or colors, as Robert poetically put. And I just want to add in a sidebar. Since moving from LA to the Bay, I've become a far more colorful, multimodal gal. I bike, I walk, I take BART and drive, and working on a visionary, albeit tedious, Measure J, my first measure, gets me really excited. I've been selling this measure to all my friends, and I'm really ready to sell some more, especially when it comes to funding the right kind of well-designed, complete streets, especially. And to sum up, Measure J is an immense opportunity to revolutionize, as you all said, Contra Costa's current infrastructure to enhance the quality of life for all of its current and future inhabitants. Bike East Bay sees itself as a team player, and we are more than willing to go the extra mile to coordinate and retool, as Newell said, and keep Measure J moving sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Erica. The next speaker is Jerry Grace, to be followed by Tandra Erickson, and then the last, nope, there are two there. These are thick cards. And then the last speaker, that card that I have is for Smitty Schmidt. So, Jerry, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am very surprised as most of you guys know me very well. Some people don't know who I am. My name is Jerry Grace, and I live in the city of Sao Paulo, California. I'm in the city of Sao Paulo. But this is very cool. And thank you for saying, I don't know who sent this to me, but I'm very glad I'm here today about this, because I want to see, BART is already went on, going through a lot of the cities, and now they're going to different very soon. But I want to see, going through Richmond all the way up to the top of the mountain. I hope you know what I mean as a up top of the mountain. I want Highway 580 to Highway 4 all the way straight up, meet up the other bridge, or meet up with, I can't say the name of that other town. West CC County, I'm going to be very glad if they do it. I know the West Cat is doing that, but what I'm seeing is the last time I was up there, there was too many cars up there. There's a lot of people using the West Cat buses go to BART, and a lot of them have a lot of problem with BART, and a lot of them need easy and faster I want to see you do that. That's why I said I like what your plan is. That's a great idea. That's what I'm seeing, and I'm wanting to see that way for the West CC County. And other hand, about what you said about painting, about Ramon in Brentwood. Don't worry about Brentwood. Brentwood will get the mail around, go to the me up the Pushbury Point. And I know she told you about that a few times. And that gal already told you about that because she's working on that part of it. Because they are talking about it, mail around to meet up with that station very soon. Now, San Ramon and all the way to Wall Creek. I don't know when they will have me up that main line, because last time I saw a map, the old map, they had all four counties together. They said they will have a plan from San Ramon all the way to the Wall Creek, meet up together. They just say then Bayfair and crack that open. But very soon Wall Creek will break that open and then get that going to Ramon all the way down to Princeton very soon. That's what I'm ready to say. That's what I'm going to let you know.
Thank you, Jerry. That's part of our study as well, so thank you very much. Okay, Tundra Erickson and then Smitty Schmidt.
Hello. Thank you very much for letting me speak. I appreciated the ability, or I appreciated your town hall meetings and had never been involved in talking about transportation before, so I appreciated that and wanted to come. I do definitely think that we should proceed and try to get something on the ballot in 2016. I think you are exactly right that if we don't get it done in November 2016, passing for transportation, it's a prime opportunity that you're going to miss. Mr. Durant, I just wanted to share a couple of personal stories about why so many single occupancy vehicles are being used. I live in Orinda, and I have wanted to take public transportation, and it's absolutely not available. I'll give an example. Just a couple of months ago, I wanted to either ride my bike, which I often do, and it was raining, and it's absolutely unsafe to ride there. I think if anybody that bikes in most of Contra Costa County, you'll see that the ratio of bikers is about 10 men to 1 woman, because we're just not that crazy to ride in unsafe situations. But we do, my husband rides often. I used to ride to work. And unfortunately, I've taken a new job in Vallejo, and in Vacaville, and I would absolutely love to take public transportation. I would go to Walnut Creek. There's an express bus that gets there. It does not return for another 10 and a half hours later. I wanted to go and attend my local assemblywoman's meeting that was at St. Mary's College on a Saturday morning. The bus did not run until after 10, and the meeting started at 9. So I think if you even provide us options, or if we wanted to go to San Ramon, we often ride our bikes along Iron Horse Trail, but as you know, going along the Olympic corridor is pretty crazy. It's unsafe to get to Walnut Creek BART, so we typically come to Pleasant Hill, which is great. So if looking at that, I was really impressed with the town hall that the vast majority of the people that spoke were looking for transit options, and they wanted their potholes filled, but they did not want new roads built. We want options, and it was at least 9 to, for every 9 people that spoke, there might have been 1 that was mentioning expanding roads. I think that right now we really want transit and not transportation options. We don't want potholes, but we don't want 10 and 11. We already have 10-lane roads, freeways, and they're still absolutely full, as you know. I don't think putting an extra lane is going to really make it bigger. So thank you. Please go for 2016, get it on the ballot, and please think transit first, including bikes.
Thank you, Tundra. We heard you loud and clear on those town halls, and your Olympic corridor congestion in the bike lane is going to get better. That's being worked on. Yeah, the connection through Walnut Creek is going to be much safer. So thank the county for that. And Smitty Schmidt is our last speaker. Thanks, Smitty. Wrap it up with 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to direct your attention to a letter that was sent to Julie Pierce on November 16th. I believe you all should have a copy of this. It's from the AIA to the association. And the first point, the main point is, there's in the spreadsheet for proposed projects, or tentative projects, there's the Alamo Major Streets Improvements section. That term has been used for a lot of different things, most of which have been negative for Alamo, or it would have been if they had been implemented. The letter suggests some alternative language has been approved by the Alamo MAC. It's been approved by our local supervisor, who said she would try to get that language changed. And so I would urge you to take a look at the language and change it as possible. The other thing is, Alamo does not have any representation in the EPAC. We would like either through the MAC, the MAC, according to the county rules, could not do that because it's not allowed to talk to anybody else without going through the supervisor. So maybe AIA could be somebody to be part of the EPAC. One other thing I would say about Alamo constricting. You can't. We've been told in Alamo there's no space to widen 680 anymore. That hasn't happened. And the other thing is, if you want to widen Danville Boulevard, there's a lot of pressure to do that, and has been for years. You will totally destroy the town of Alamo the moment you do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Smitty. We appreciate your comments. We appreciate all of the comments tonight.
Madam Chair, may I just respond, because I did check this out. You've got this in the letter here.
Yeah.
And he's asking, this has been taken up, and county staff will be communicating this to, it's just a timing issue. It will be handled.
So in response to your comments, Smitty, about the Alamo Improvement Association, the Board of Supervisors is working on that, and it will be addressed. Thank you for bringing it to us and making it part of the record. That's very helpful. All right, back to the board. Karen, you said you wanted to save your comments until after our public speakers, so you're up next.
Thank you. I'll support this moving forward. I think we do need to look at it. I appreciate the enthusiasm in the audience, and we all know we need these things done. I feel like I'm the bucket of water that's throwing on your enthusiasm. I have very serious concerns that the public in 2016, even though we know that's when it has to happen, that they will support this. We have done fabulous work. We have projects and programs to show for it, but there is a very different mentality out there by the general public, and I'm seeing it. I'll let my colleagues speak to it. But we're dealing with other issues in other jurisdictions, and we are seeing voters continue to turn down ballot measures as much as we work as hard as we can to convince them. And again, I support these projects. I will support any motion that says we continue to work on this, that we need get the involvement back. And I'm usually a very optimistic person, but I have very serious grave doubts that we will be able to convince our public to support this, especially, and it's not a criticism of BART, it's not a criticism of AC, but I'm hearing that there's going to be a measure on the ballot to increase the tobacco tax. So I think that voters are going to have voter fatigue is my concern. So again, I support us moving forward and continuing to look at this. I understand what Mayor Budd is saying relative to putting some sort of time frame on this, because we're continuing to expend time and effort and energy and resources. And at some point, I think we're going to have to fish or cut bait. Thank you.
Okie doke. Tom, did you have something else, or did you just forget to turn it off? Okay. Don and Newell both in that order.
I was just going to try and summarize some of what I heard. And, one is, I think the vast majority of us, if not everybody, wants to proceed at this point to seek to put a measure on the ballot in 2016. And I think the public polling is telling us that. The fact that people are coming here to say that they appreciated the town halls is a very good sign to me. While not everyone commented on it, no one suggested that we keep the TEP and the CTP aligned. And several people said we should split them. So I assume that's there's sort of consensus in that direction. I think everyone referenced some sort of changing our approach. And there are several areas where a change of approach might be appropriate. One is sort of the mission of EPAC and how we solicit information, exactly what we solicit, whether it's values or whether we ask them to respond to a specific transportation expenditure plan. There's discussion about the role of the CCTA and whether we, if I'll borrow Tom's idea, to attach different words to Tom's idea, get super diplomats to try and get something done, or move to a committee of the whole so we can make decisions faster, or some combination of both. I'm not sure those two are incompatible by any means. I think that we check back frequently because, whether it's 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, if this isn't going to work, we don't want to have it go longer than it needs to, but right now I think we all want to go. And I appreciate Janet's comment. To me, it goes without saying that we recognize that the county is heterogeneous, and that what works in one area of the county need not work in all, and that this is not, while there are some things upon which we can all agree, we need to respect the differences that occur within different parts of the county. And did I say that we want to make 2016 successful, and we want this to be a game-changing effort?
Okay. Very good. Newell.
I was just going to, I was going to say very similar things, but I would just add that, maybe in response to Karen, that I think it's our job to solve problems, and not to say, well, that one's going to be so hard it won't work. And that is the way. This is what I heard. So what I heard is that from our constituents, that it is really important for us to try to solve real problems. And the problems before this is that we have a transportation system that has a lot of components. It has the rubber meets the road solutions. We have ferries. We have BARTs. We have a lot of those things. Some work well and some don't. That's just reality. We have more population. Every 4 weeks, 3 days, you have to build a town the size of Danville, 43,000 people. Why? Net birth death rate, people moving in and out of California. That's our net. That's not growth inducing. That's nothing to do with the environment. That's just the reality. By the way, it used to be under 4 weeks in 2008. The point is that is real. That's why we are feeling that it's hard to get everywhere. And our population is growing, and all the time we didn't do anything other than this transportation agency, while California and the United States as a whole, was sitting there saying, we're not going to make any decisions. Our population continued to grow with millions of people. We pushed them into the same housing stock. And now we have an economy it's not the best economy. It's about where we were. And people are working. It's incumbent upon us to find solutions to help solve that. Absent that, we will fail. We will not be able to sit in places like that. We won't be able to afford to buy a car. We won't be able to afford to pay for water systems. We won't be able to do all of that. So we must solve this. And I think what our dear friend Glover was saying is it's going to take a lot of compromise, and we need to get off our rear ends. And I think to our constituents, I heard some of the nicest comments I think I've heard from our biking groups. A different flavor than what we've heard. We had bikes, and a lot of money was spent. We had a lot of agencies that changed us, individual cities, that changed our standards and made it every road that goes in, we shall add safe routes for schools. We shall add biking. We made a lot of great strides, and I think we ought to celebrate that, figure out what can we do a little bit better, recognizing that we have some fundamental things that are going to take a lot of money to fix. Are we going to preserve all the programs we have? That's the input that we need. I think our facilitation, I would add to the list on. I think our EPAC needs an additional facilitator in there that has a different approach, that is solely focused on the values and how to reach consensus, and also an evaluation. What did we do well in the past? What didn't we do well? And I think we ought to hear that. That's an honest conversation. We ought to know what we did and what we didn't. And I think that's what the EPAC can really help us do. But I want to move forward. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But we should try.
Okay. Well, I think I am hearing that we need to be, okay. Go ahead, Pedro.
Thank you. One of the things I wanted to remind people of is, as you know, the bottleneck in this whole discussion of the last measure ended up being the urban limit line. So I'm going to ask the staff, make sure that they contact the county, see when the review is going to be done, because that data information is going to be very important also to a number of the constituencies. So.
Yeah, my understanding is that review is scheduled for April or something like that. It sure would be nice if it was sooner than that. That would, I think, be very helpful to us. So anything our two representatives can do to bump that up a little, that would be great.
I don't see it moving any sooner than that.
Okay.
And I'm looking at my staff person, and he's even shaking his head that
Okay.
we're not even sure it's in
All right.
April.
All right. Well, what I have heard tonight, though, is that from everyone, this board and our public, is that we have to be aspirational. We have to believe we can do this. Our public believes in us. They have spoken almost unanimously. We had over 9,000 people on our combined town halls, telephone town halls. I heard down in Newport Beach this weekend, I heard from someone in Concord who got a call and was so excited, even though the answer that we gave her was, we may not be able to fix that problem. We're going to try, but we may not be able. She was so excited to hear an honest answer that she was inspired. And so she was so glad to know that we cared about her opinion and all the others on the phone. So I think that's important. The public has spoken. They want us to try to fix the myriad of problems that we face. And I think Newell is absolutely right. This is all about our kids and grandkids' generation and making sure that we, as senior citizens, can get around. We have a lot of problems to solve, but it's something we have to do. We have to try. And I don't think, other than a few people who are cautious and concerned that we might not be able to make the lift, I don't think I heard anybody that said we shouldn't try. I mean, I didn't hear a single person in the audience say we shouldn't try. I didn't hear anybody here at this board say we shouldn't try. So I would like to at least get a nodding of heads that is consensus that we send our staff back to work and say we're willing to put our shoulder to the wheel and we are willing to meet extra meetings if we have to do that. David?
No, I will be the first one to nod the head that way, but I want to go one step further. I think Don's onto something. I'm sorry, Member Tadson's onto something. We need to be the committee of the whole. You don't have that much time to be in or out. We can't be running through subcommittees or planning or APC.
That's right.
You got to be ready to fall on a sword, I think is what Federal's not saying, but it's out there. If you're going to believe that you're going to have to do something in 2016, you're going to have to speak up at these meetings, and we're going to have to be ready to compromise. I mean, it isn't that hard to go December, January, okay. It's now how fast staff can get it back or whatever, I'd leave it up to whatever, but I like what I heard, Don. I think we have the technical people that Member Budd is talking about. We've had them. They've done this. We've listened to them. Unfortunately, it's time that we all listen to them. We all decide. They tell us it's good, it's bad, and we decide we want it or we don't want it. But if we don't go after this in 2016 because we didn't meet enough or we didn't talk enough, then shame on us.
Okay, so I'm hearing a consensus around the room. David, do you want to talk again? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm trying to wrap us up so that we have direction here.
I'm with you.
I think I heard it.
All right. So I 100% agree with what Commissioner Hudson had to say. And so we're clear about something from what I was trying to say earlier. I am an optimist. I've fully supported the idea of pursuing a measure in 2016. I also, however, want to continue to be realistic about the roadblocks from getting from here to there, and Dave said it well. That there has to be a spirit of compromise. There has to be a spirit of give and take. Everybody who shows up has to be willing to have honest conversations and to make compromises, or it's a waste of energy and a waste of time. And so I'm all about that. I'm 100% in on the idea. What I don't want to have us do is leave tonight only simply saying that we want to go forward, because I don't think that gives our staff enough. That's not enough meat on the bones for them to go further, and for them to go further quickly, particularly with the holidays upon us. Right? You got we all know what the holidays are, but next 6-7 weeks. There's a limit on what we're going to be able to get done in that 6-7 weeks, if there's not clarity of purpose and clarity of mission, and if we haven't identified what components we want them to be focused on. And so before we run out of here, and again, I get the desire to leave. I would feel uncomfortable if I was sitting where Ross is, with just what comes out of this conversation being continue marching toward November 2016.
So I'm going to ask Ross what he heard tonight and what he thinks we need to do to go forward. And when I say it means all of us around the table, that means all of us. That's not just the commissioners. That means staff has to be committed too. All of the staff have to be committed.
Comment?
Yes.
Okay. What I'm concerned about and what I'm hearing said that I think is not being covered, that should be covered, is the status of the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee and also the regional committees in this process, because we haven't really stated what that is, and it would be nice if we would include in what we're saying what that is, and I would hope that we will still be going there, would be the answer.
I think what we've heard is that the EPAC will be given direction of what they need to give feedback on, and I think the RTPCs by statute are included on everything. So you'll get your crack at it again as we go back and forth, because we're going to have to decide what people are going to compromise on. Frankly, we all asked for too much in this package that we've got right now, and it's got to be trimmed down. So let me give it to Ross. We'll be quiet for a minute and see what Ross heard.
Okay, well, I've heard a number of things, and I think I can answer a few of the things that have been discussed. We've already talked about kind of a late date scenario, so I know there's a lot of talk about we need to set some fixed timeline and Fisher cut bait. May is feeling very late. That's the date we talked about previously of having something that we felt had consensus and we could start going out to city councils and the board. So yeah, we have to get real very quickly, and it's not something that's going to drag on if we're going to make it to 2016. So we're gonna know where we are in 2016 pretty quickly. I think that to cycle back, and I appreciate the direction for EPAC. I think to a certain extent that's what we've tried to do, is to work on values, but we're all over the place. So we can, I think hearing you state that, and we can take that back directly, I think we could be more successful with that. So we can cycle back with the EPAC, we can cycle back with the RTPCs. Recognizing this is an information item, I wrote down about 4 things that I intend to put on the agenda for December, including a discussion about potential changing formal role for this body, whether we want to form a committee of the whole or how to proceed with that. Seek some direction on some specific funding and policy issues, and whether it's out of sync with how we work with the stakeholders. At some point we just have to say this is the way it is and move forward and get reactions to that. We will be regrouping a little bit. Good direction here, and some of the things, particularly with the EPAC, working with the RTPCs, some of the other stakeholders, we don't need any further direction on that. And then there'll be some formal actions that we'll ask you to take in December. So message loud and clear, and again, I appreciate it because we needed this kind of discussion, because a lot of people are wondering where
individuals are, and we need to hear this kind of consensus from the board, and it's really going to, I believe it's really going to help staff and the consultants when we go back out into the community.
Madam Chair, I have a question. I'm still not clear on what we're going to go back and ask EPAC to do. Are we going to go back and ask them to work on values or projects?
We're probably going to double down and ask them about both.
Are we
and
going to
tell
do
them
that in
get
December?
specific in direction and learn to compromise.
Are we going to do that in December?
Yes, I've said a little bit different, but we've been hearing statements of value more than statements of how we want to spend the money. Of course, there's some folks with that. We've kind of mixed it up, and I think we need to. And we can't forget the money. That's a big part of it. But if we focus more on the values, and we've already started some discussions with different subgroups, and there's leaders who are starting to emerge that we think we can work with. So again, with conversation that's come out of here today and what we had in place until we kind of took this pause, I think there is some optimism we can do. We can make some progress with that group by the end of the calendar year.
And I appreciate that. I'm sure all of us have heard it. And there's been several criticisms of that, and I'm not laying any blame, but I heard in earlier conversations, how are we going to do it different? Are we bringing in a different facilitator? Are we utilizing staff more? I'm hearing from constituents who sit on EPAC who feel frustrated. So and maybe tonight isn't the place to answer that, but if you're going to meet by the end of the calendar year, we're not meeting again, I guess, till the 16th of December. So how are we going to do that?
Yeah, I haven't discussed this with anyone, but I'll say it right here. We need a new facilitator. There's no question about that, and that's not any kind of.
Yeah, I mean, we're just moving forward.
Just moving forward.
I think we're trying to restructure how we're approaching things, and that's part of it.
And then working again with some of the smaller groups and some of the folks who have really trying to take a leadership role to corral some of the related interests.
So what I'm hearing is staff is going to have to be more involved because, as I say, December 16th is 4 weeks from tonight, and I'm going to assume you're going to try and get a meeting and do some of this before we hear back on that.
Yeah.
We have a meeting scheduled, and staff is very involved already.
When is that meeting?
We have a meeting scheduled for December 7th.
Thank you.
Okay. Randy?
Is there any clarity on splitting the TEP and the CTP? Is that because you didn't talk about that, Rob?
That's one of the action items I've written down for December. I think I would defer to Mala.
I heard a fair amount of consensus around this table toward doing that.
We can formalize that in December, and I would defer to Mala.
Yes, and we'll look at the implications on that for CEQA and others.
Yeah, I think the idea that you can do a TEP before you do a CEP and avoid CEQA entirely needs to have a legal opinion, because I don't think you can do that.
I think there are differing legal opinions around the state, and we've heard some of those last week over the weekend down in Newport Beach. So we will confirm on that. Randy, did you have your light on to speak? You did earlier. That was all you wanted to ask about? Okay. Okay, the other thing I want to ask my board is, are we all in agreement that if staff thinks we need to have another authority meeting before December 16th, we can do that?
Yes. We also have alternates. And
yes, we do.
We should probably put them on notice. And like for example, I know I will not be here December 16th.
Okay.
So
all
we'll just make sure that my alternate is.
Absolutely. So I think we need to all think about that, and perhaps when you come back for either of those meetings, we have a suggested schedule so we could start calendaring some of these, because I think if we really work hard, we can get a lot more done. If that means we have to meet a couple extra times or three or whatever, I think that's worthwhile. It keeps the conversation moving. Okay? All right. I think we're done with that item. You have your direction. Okay? Thank you. You guys are doing a great job, and I know you feel like you got whiplash, but you know what? We appreciate it so much. We have the best staff anywhere, so you guys are wonderful. The next item on the agenda is the correspondence and communications. Advised for your reading. Item 6, associated committee reports are in your packet. I think I've made all the comments I need to for tonight. We've accomplished our goal.
You have a speaker card. That was a duplicate of the gentleman left.
Right. Yeah, he left. I wrote that down. He was confused about how to manage his comments, but that's okay. We got it. And we have commissioner and staff comments. Any commissioner comments? I will report out on behalf of all of those of us who went to Newport Beach to the Focus on the Future conference. Janet was there, Sherry McCoy was there, I was there, Amy went, Bob Taylor went. Who'd I miss? Anybody? I think that was us. Pardon? Yes, Bob Taylor was painting. He was very colorful the entire weekend. But I have to say, in respect to that report out, I have to tell you, that was probably one of the most productive, informative conferences we've had to date. We learned so much. There was a tremendous amount of networking with folks from around the state that I think was extremely helpful in bringing us to where we are actually tonight. So I think that was extremely helpful. Any other commissioner comments? If not, executive, I'm sorry, Janet?
Don't we have to do our AB 1234 reports?
I just did it
You
on
just did it
behalf
for
of all of us.
Okay, fine, thank you.
That's why I named all the people who went. Thank you. Okay, executive staff comments. Randy? Oh, I'm sorry, Chris?
Yeah, two brief comments. One, AC Transit's proceeding forward with its service enhancement plan, largely driven by the Measure BB money. We hope to be able to do that with renewal of Measure J money. But that's been a very public process, and I always say one of the jobs of an elected official is to get yelled at, and I've been doing that recently. And secondly, we just authorized grant applications for another 10 fuel cell buses. So if those go through, I think you'll start seeing a lot more fuel cell buses in Contra Costa County.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm going to hold you up for 1 second, Randy. I overlooked Jerry's second card. He wanted to speak on the West County Transit Report.
This is 604.
6.4 is the West County Transportation Agency or Transportation Advisory Committee report.
Correct. What I have seen on here very closely, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I don't know if this would be on this board or not, but the West County WCCTAC report, do you have a special meeting November the 6th?
November 6th has already passed.
I mean, wait a second.
Oh, did they meet that day?
Yeah.
Janet, did you guys meet, or Tom, did you guys meet on November 6th?
Yeah, they had,
November
they had a
6th.
special meeting on November 6th.
Okay. Yes, they did.
Okay. I am wondering, could I get a report or something in the mail or something to tell me what did happen on that day?
I think Janet can tell you offline.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Thanks, Jerry.
That's my first time I come here. I never know anything. I try here to be here many times. This is my first time I'm here now today.
I'm used to seeing you at MTC, but welcome to CCTA.
I knew I saw it. I knew if I see it
Okay.
before somebody
Yes.
see the board.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. Okay, Randy, you're up.
Commissioners, I just want to mention holiday season's coming up, so make sure that everybody takes a little extra time to get to where they want to go. There's going to be a lot of traffic, and sometimes we forget that. It'll be dark and a lot of people out walking, and we just don't want to have any tragedies, hopefully, in our county. And thanks staff, Ross and Lindsay and Martin. They've been working diligently trying to get this stuff all sorted out, and it's, we're delivering a capital improvement program, and of which I wanted to mention we did get a national award from the Construction Management Association of America. I even attended the national meeting and accepted this award. There's a mistake. It says actually valued less than $150 million. It's actually only $50 million, but we'll take the $150 million. And it's for Sand Creek. And that little project that we got Prop 1B savings money for has really benefited Brentwood. It used to be in the top 10 accident locations in that city for the last decade, and once the structures were built, they haven't had an accident there since. So it's doing exactly what it should. But I also want to thank our consultants, because we have a lot of consultants that, 90% of our work is done by consultants, and sometimes we forget to recognize them as well. And so we just have Ross and his team, and Martin and his team, and Lindsay and her team. They take the time to get the right consultants on board that meshes with us as a team, and that's really, really important. And so I wanted to thank our consultants. And I know we've been here a long time, so I'll just go to the last piece. We are trying to innovate here in Contra Costa. We have exclusive rights to the self-driving vehicle. We're going to test that at a Momentum station and try to provide first and last mile connectivity using, in this case, an electric motor, maybe not a fuel cell, but that might come later. But we're trying to do something for electric vehicles that we checked with PG&E that hasn't been done. And the idea is to streamline the process so that if you buy an electric car, you and your buddies don't go out and try to put it in yourself and burn your house down. And so we're going to try to do that so that when you buy a car in Contra Costa and you live in Contra Costa, you'll get a list of vendors, approved electricians, and where to go to buy that Type 2 charger and make sure it's done properly. And so hopefully that'll spur and be incentive for those people that want to buy electric vehicles to go ahead and buy one, and then develop a plan to make sure we have the infrastructure in place to support electric vehicles in the future, but also fuel cell vehicles, because you're going to need hydrogen plants in especially located places, and if you don't have hydrogen, your buses don't move. So with that, happy holidays, and thank you for
Madam Chair, I have a
being on
question,
board.
Mr. Iwasaki. Relative to that issue, you said you're working with PG&E and they're going to give you a vendor list. As we're looking forward to 2016, one of the key constituencies is labor. And I just want to know if we've reached out, or how can labor reach out to PG&E to get on that vendor list?
Yeah, so the vendor list is actually, I probably said it too simply. It's a list of electricians that have gone through the PG&E training course on how to wire a 240. So you need a 40 amp breaker, and then they'll audit the wires coming into your home. Newell knows more about this than I do, but making sure that they're quality to accept that kind of loading to make sure you can charge your vehicle safely and properly.
So is it always going to be a PG&E employee?
No.
They just went through their program.
Okay,
that's
they've
fine.
gone through their training program.
I just know that some of us might get phone calls if they
No,
hear
there's an
about
acronym that's, I don't remember now, but it's.
Okay, thank you.
They've gone through a certification process, and then a list where you can buy the Type 2 chargers. We don't dictate that, but then in Pittsburgh's case, they're looking at trying to make sure that maybe the inspection can be done for free, using some incentives from the power plant that's out there. So we're looking for some ways to at least try to incentivize the alternate fueled vehicles like AC Transit.
Okay, and before we adjourn this evening, I just want to thank all of the public who came out to speak tonight. They took an interest and came out to tell us what they thought, and I want to thank our consultant team, because they know they're going to be doubling down as well. And, we're moving in unison together, and I'm excited about it. And thank you all. We will see you very soon.